On the Gaia continent, monsters have been mysteriously disappearing for years. At first, everyone thought they were just going extinct or something, but nah, turns out these creatures were actually getting sucked into another freaking dimension. Yeah, wild, right? And funny enough, that exact twist was what one particular mage had been hoping to uncover. This dude had been obsessed with studying the whole monster exodus thing for ages. Still, even after all that digging, he had zero clue about why or how the creatures were jumping worlds. But honestly, he didn't care much about the reason. His main focus was figuring out how to use that power for himself. So after collecting every little piece of research he could get his hands on, he finally set up a massive magic circle deep inside a dungeon known as the Great Labyrinth. After years of grinding his old ass, it was finally go time. He lined up the coordinates, poured in his mana, and stepped right into the magic circle, ready to make the ultimate leap to another world. A blinding flash erupted around him, lighting up everything like a damn supernova. The spell kicked in bright aura, glowing light, the whole deal. And then, boom, nothing. Silence. When he came to, he realized something was off. The air felt different. The temperature was weird, but this wasn't another dimension. He was still outside the dungeon. Actually, correction, the dungeon itself had been teleported to another world, leaving him standing in a giant empty hole where it used to be. Talk about an oops moment. Meanwhile, somewhere in that different dimension, a young guy stood frozen in his attic, staring at an interdimensional portal that had just appeared out of nowhere. Up until a few seconds ago, his day had been painfully normal. Kang Jinhyuk was just doing his usual work routine, watching college kids rush around, feeling that little sting of nostalgia for his own student days, back when he still had energy and ambition. Now though, life was way different. As a low-tier hunter, he didn't have time for dreams or fancy goals. His coworker had to literally snap him out of his daydreaming, reminding him they were only halfway done with their shift and couldn't slack off. After a long-ass day, the two finally crashed inside their van. Jinhyuk barely had on any warm clothes, even though it was freezing. But hey, perks of being a hunter. Even the weakest ones got boosted tolerance to temperature, which saved him some serious heating cash. Still, the perks didn't pay the bills. The guy was broke as hell and stuck doing random part-time jobs since every big guild hogged all the good hunter work. To make things worse, a local serial killer was out there targeting hunters from top guilds, and now those same guilds were greedily snatching up every single job around. So yeah, Jinhyuk's dream of ranking up was looking pretty damn hopeless. But today, things took a sharp turn. Out of nowhere, a loud crash followed by terrified screams echoed from the nearby school. Jackpot chaos like that usually meant monsters, and taking down even a few could score him enough money to chill for an entire year. Except, of course, his luck ran out fast. Just as he rushed in, some guy slammed right into him, knocking him aside, while a squad of elite hunters swooped in to handle the scene. The area's main guild titan was already on it, moving fast and clean like pros. Their deputy guildmaster, Du-yun, snapped at Jinhyuk to scram unless he had a death wish. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. The gap between a broke-ass D-rank hunter like Jinhyuk and an A-rank beast from a major guild was way too wide to cross. With his ambitions crushed yet again, Jinhyuk just sighed, dusted himself off, and dragged himself to his next part-time shift, praying it'd at least cover a few damn bills. Later that night, when Jinhyuk drags himself home, completely weighed down by defeat, he suddenly hears a strange sound echoing from deeper inside his apartment, and that's when things start getting weird. Because when he follows the noise, he ends up standing face to face with a freaking portal to another world filled with monsters, just casually floating there like it owns the place. The creatures on the other side can't seem to see him at all, and even when he steps closer, nothing happens, which instantly gets his brain spinning because this might be the break he's been waiting for his whole miserable life. He heads downstairs to gather his thoughts, trying to process the insanity in front of him, and it hits him that this portal is basically a dungeon, the kind people used to think only existed in theory, and if it had appeared anywhere else, he'd be jumping with joy. But since it's right in his damn attic, things just got way more complicated. Reporting it to the Hunter Association would mean they'd take over his place for investigation and boot him out instantly, so his only real move is to keep it low-key and claim the dungeon for himself. But before that, he needs to confirm whether monsters can cross into his world, because even though they can't see him, he knows he's barely strong enough to take down 2 or 3 goblins alone, and if an entire group somehow made it through, he'd be completely done for. With nothing left to lose, he takes a deep breath and steps right into the portal, landing on what looks like the first floor of a dungeon maze, where he barely gets a second to take in his surroundings, before a goblin charges him from the left, swinging a crude club straight at his face, forcing him to dodge and scramble right back into his attic. From there, he watches the goblin stumble around, confused, swinging at empty air like it's gone blind, which tells him 2 things: that they can't see the portal from their side, and they definitely can't cross through it either. That realization wipes away every ounce of fear he had, and he grabs a baseball bat, jumps back through the portal, and charges the goblin head-on, swinging with everything he's got, smashing it across the cheek and sending it flying before stabbing it straight in the chest to finish it off. For the first time ever, he's hunted solo, and with no teammates around. All the experience points are his alone. His level, which had been frozen for 3 years, finally ticks up, and the goblin corpse is now his property, worth a potential 3 million won if he plays it smart. The next day, he heads straight to a hunter's market with the body, hoping to cash in, and the merchant takes one look at the poorly handled corpse and instantly realizes this guy's a total newbie because his sloppy kill has already tanked the market value. But even then, Jin-hyuk somehow manages to secure just over 3 million won, exactly as he'd hoped. Now, all that's left is to provide the location of his hunt for verification, but that's the one piece of info he can't risk revealing, because if anyone finds out there's a dungeon chilling inside his attic, his little gold mine would vanish faster than that goblin he flattened with a bat. As he's trying to figure out how to escape this new mess, a group of hunters from the Black Dragon Guild suddenly storms in like a pack of starving hyenas looking for their next meal. Apparently, someone dared to steal a kill from their hunting grounds, and they're furious about it. At first, they zero in on Jin-hyuk, ready to pounce, but the merchant quickly points fingers at a clueless blonde-haired hunter standing nearby, and just like that, the poor bastard becomes their new target, getting beaten and interrogated before he can even explain himself, because sneaking into their territory without permission is straight-up suicide. For all the guild knows, this random guy could even be the serial killer they've been tracking, and as they drag his half-conscious body out of the building, Jin-hyuk just stands there, realizing how close he was to being in the blonde dude's shoes. Knowing there's no way he can lie about where the goblin came from, he decides selling here isn't worth the risk, and if he values his life, he'll need to find another way to offload his loot without crossing paths with those big guild psychos ever again. As soon as Jin-hyuk gets back home, he decides it's time to level up. Before he heads back into the dungeon, he arms himself with a teleportation stone for quick escapes back to his apartment, a monster tracking compass with a 50-meter range, and, of course, his trusty baseball bat. Fully equipped, he steps back into the dungeon for a monster-slaying spree, each victory ticking up his level by 1. True to its name, the Goblin Labyrinth is packed with goblins, making it the perfect playground for someone at level 2 to grind for experience. After a long day of hunting, his inventory is nearly maxed out. He's got room for just one more goblin. He hopes it'll be a big one for some extra cash. The compass pings, showing a goblin approaching his location. Perfect. All he needs to do is hide and launch a surprise attack. Jin-hyuk positions himself around a corner, waits for the perfect moment, and swings his bat right into the face of a remarkably short man. To Jin-hyuk's horror, it's not a goblin, but a very irate stranger shouting at him in a language he can't understand. Jin-hyuk hurriedly bows an apology, which seems to calm the man down just enough. The stranger pulls 2 necklaces from a bag, hands one to Jin-hyuk, and as soon as Jin-hyuk puts it on, he can suddenly understand every furious word the man is saying. That's when he realizes 2 things. First, the guy has every reason to be mad, having just taken a bat to the face, and second, this isn't just a short man, it's a dwarf, a mythical being he'd only read about in fantasy novels. As the dwarf continues to rant, Jin-hyuk helps pick up the items scattered around, all of which look exceptionally high quality. Unfortunately, he doesn't get a chance to admire them before the dwarf notices his bat and snatches it up, demanding to know where Jin-hyuk got it. Jin-hyuk panikedly explains it's just an ordinary aluminum baseball bat, but the dwarf seems to think it's made from orichalcum, a highly prized metal. To the dwarf, this ordinary bat is so valuable that no amount of money could buy it. Instead, he offers Jin-hyuk a trade, some rare items from his own stash in exchange for the bat. Seeing no reason to refuse, Jin-hyuk follows the dwarf back to his workshop, watching as the dwarf takes the bat deeper into the maze of tools and treasures. As Jin-hyuk glances around the workshop, his eyes fall on the various weapons laid out. He can't help but wonder which one he should try to swipe, but the dwarf returns before he can make up his mind. In his hands is Jin-hyuk's newly upgraded baseball bat. For some reason, it's shining bright red and has a slight glow. Jin-hyuk double-checks, is this really his bat? The dwarf confirms that it's just one of orichalcum's traits. It starts out weak and flimsy, but once enchanted, it becomes incredibly strong and durable. That last word catches Jin-hyuk's attention, enchanted. Somehow, the dwarf managed to enchant his bat. Testing a few swings, Jin-hyuk notices it feels entirely different from what he remembers. It's almost hard to believe that something this powerful could even exist, let alone be made from an ordinary aluminum bat. He checks his status window, and sure enough, his bat is now classified as a legendary item, boasting S-grade durability and an automatic retrieval feature. Jin-hyuk's once basic bat has turned into an ultra-rare treasure. Selling this would be a jackpot, but the item's bound to him now, so no dice. Still, even if he can't make money off the bat, he can always make some cash with the goblin corpses he's stashed in his inventory. The problem, he can't sell them openly without drawing unwanted attention. His best option is the Hunter Industries black market. They don't ask questions, and have a solid setup for dealing with unique inventory. Jin-hyuk heads home, uses one of the black market business cards, and tracks down a suspicious-looking address. The card screams shady, but it's all he's got. While searching for the entrance, a man named Deputy Cho Hyung calls down to him and invites Jin Hyuk to meet the boss. The boss, Lee Junchul, is a loan shark disguised as a loan agent who also dabbles in monster corpses on the side. When Jin Hyuk lays out 20 goblin corpses for inspection, the two men are stunned. Despite being a newbie, Jin Hyuk managed to bring in such a huge haul, and in incredible condition too. Well, except for the bashed-in heads. As they're negotiating prices, they're interrupted by a black market merchant rushing in to announce that a monster has shown up nearby. Turns out laying out 20 fresh goblin corpses was like putting up a neon sign for nearby monsters. Worse yet, two orcs definitely out of Jin Hyuk's league appear, and Jin Hyuk quickly realizes he has two options: grab his corpses and run, or become orc food. But it's too late. One of the orcs is already swinging a battle axe straight at his head. He dodges the first swing, but the second one's too close. Just when he thinks it's game over, his enchanted bat magically summons itself from his inventory and blocks the attack, sending the orc flying back. Another enchantment presence detection. With this bat, Jin Hyuk might actually stand a chance. As the orc charges again, Jin Hyuk, now more confident, goes on the offensive. He smashes the bat down on the orc's knee, disorienting it, and follows up with a strike to its face, snapping its neck instantly. Just like that, his level jumps from 24 to 36. Before he can celebrate, the second orc attacks. This time he dodges, runs behind it, and slams his bat into its back, then finishes it off with a blow to the head. With the orcs defeated, Jin Hyuk smirks, turns back to the men, and suggests they add the orc corpses to their deal. That day, he walks away with a spring in his step, having convinced them to pay him 15% above market price. His bank account is now a sight to behold, and thanks to saving the black market crew, he secured a reliable buyer for his future loot. Clearly, the black market guys have realized Jin Hyuk isn't some low-level thief. They're looking at a hunter strong enough to take down two orcs solo. Even with his legendary bat and newfound strength though, he knows he'll need better gear to tackle higher-grade monsters. Fortunately, he's got a plan to score his next upgrades, maybe even for free. The next day, Jin Hyuk shows up with a crate full of beer cans and alcohol for the dwarf, thinking he'd struck gold. After all, the dwarf loves aluminum, so why not beer cans? The dwarf's eyes widen seeing the crate full of orichalcum. He tries a can, only to spit it out immediately, the taste absolutely horrible. To avoid another shouting match, Jin Hyuk quickly offers him some soju instead. The dwarf takes a swig, and while he's mildly satisfied, there's clearly room for improvement. Jin Hyuk can sense it. The dwarf is looking for that extra kick. Taking advantage of the moment, the dwarf gives Jin Hyuk a new quest: mine some mithril ore. What does mithril have to do with alcohol? Who knows, but Jin Hyuk wants free gear, so he's in. He dives deeper into the labyrinth, emerging at a large forest clearing on the second floor. A menu pops up, telling him he can record this location as a warp point. Jin Hyuk has no idea what a warp point is, but accepts anyway, creating a portal to travel between floors. He ventures further, reaching the second floor ominously called Dogs and Skeletons. Immediately, monster dogs leap at him. Compared to the orcs he fought before, these are nothing more than free XP. He swings his bat with abandon, wiping out 25 of them, and collecting their corpses. That haul alone should net him a solid 200 million won. Tempting as the money is, he has to stay focused on his mission mining that mithril ore. As he journeys deeper, skeletons start appearing. Since skeletons can't be sold and must be destroyed by breaking their core, Jin Hyuk realizes why the dwarf sent him instead of going himself. Skeletons are an absolute pain to deal with, but they do help boost his level to 100, unlocking a new class. Expecting a berserker or warrior class after all the fighting he's done, he's shocked to find out he's been designated a cleric. After dispatching the skeletons, he finally collects the mithril. The dwarf, who doubted he'd make it back alive, seems impressed. As a reward, he offers to forge anything Jin Hyuk wants. Already armed with a legendary bat, Jin Hyuk requests lightweight armor that can still withstand heavy hits. The dwarf gets to work, and Jin Hyuk heads home for a well-deserved nap. A few hours later, he returns to find the dwarf ready with a new piece mithril chainmail. It's designed to fit snugly under his shirt and hoodie, making it the perfect hidden armor. To demonstrate, the dwarf smacks Jin Hyuk in the chest with a hammer, an attack that would have normally broken a rib or two, but Jin Hyuk barely feels it. With this armor and his enchanted bat, his combat skills have skyrocketed. Meeting this dwarf was definitely the lucky break he'd been waiting for. But the dwarf isn't done. He hands Jin Hyuk a large barrel of soju, made from the mithril ore Jin Hyuk brought back. Jin Hyuk takes it home to try, and discovers the dwarf was right. The mithril barrel has transformed the soju into something completely unique. With this in hand, he contacts the black market dealer again, offering not only cobalt corpses but now also premium quality liquor. Meanwhile, in another part of town, the Titan Guild is finishing a training session when an unexpected anomaly gate opens, spewing hordes of lizardmen. The deputy guildmaster, Du Yun, stubbornly refuses to call for backup, pushing his team to hold the line on their own. Jin-hyuk, however, is having a much better day. His cleric class is now officially registered, and he's been promoted from D rank to C rank. Given that clerics are rare and highly sought after by top guilds, he's excited about the new opportunities. Just then, a bloodied hunter bursts in, desperate for a cleric's help. Jin-hyuk volunteers, and is taken to the site where Titan Guild members are locked in battle with the Lizardmen. He's instructed to stay in the back and heal as many people as he can. Jin-hyuk wants to jump in on the action, but the guild member assures him that healing is all he needs to do, and he'll be handsomely paid once the fight is over. The healer's presence is enough to keep the guild members fighting, but the waves of Lizardmen are relentless. One of the other clerics suggests calling a support guild for backup. As the odds are starting to look grim, just as Jin-hyuk is considering their next move, he senses a hostile presence behind him. His trusty bat saves him from a near-fatal blow delivered by a sneaky lizardman who somehow bypassed all the hunters, aiming straight for the healers. Realizing that the rear defense has been breached, Jin-hyuk swings his bat, sending the attacker flying. He quickly warns the other clerics about the breach, understanding that he's the only one who can hold them off. The monsters must have used the concealment technique to slip through, planning to ambush the healers from behind. Jin-hyuk instructs the clerics to focus on healing and leave the lizardmen to him. The other clerics look at him with concern. They think he's just another ordinary healer like them, but Jin-hyuk charges in, reassuring them with a confidence he's only kind of feeling himself. In reality, he's nervous, but he manages to hold his ground against the onslaught. At one point, a lizardman slips past his guard and lunges for another cleric. Jin-hyuk bolts after it, leaping just in time to intercept the attack. He lands a rush blow, but leaves himself open for a stab from behind. Thankfully, the dwarf's chainmail armor absorbs the impact, leaving the monster in shock when its attack doesn't work. Jin-hyuk seizes the moment, countering with a solid swing to the creature's face, managing to hold the line and allowing the clerics to focus solely on healing. Suddenly, the lizardmen freeze, as a powerful figure joins the fray, a man who takes down one of the monsters with a single punch. It's Seo Sangho, the Titan Guildmaster himself. He nods at Jin-hyuk and asks if he was the one who took down all the monsters in the area. Jin-hyuk, a bit confused about who this powerhouse is, admits he was handling things here. The clerics are baffled. How could he not recognize Sangho, the infamous S-rank hunter? With no time to spare, Sangho heads back into battle, promising to reward Jin-hyuk for his help later. As soon as he steps in, his presence immediately raises everyone's spirits, everyone except Do-yoon, who's clearly irritated. Sangho takes charge without hesitation, barking orders and commanding attention from all the hunters. With the area cleared, he unleashes a powerful shockwave attack that sends the lizardmen flying. In mere moments, Sangho has wiped out the remaining monsters. Satisfied that his guild members are now safe, Sangho turns to Do-yoon, grabbing him by the jacket to reprimand him. What was he thinking, risking his life and the lives of everyone else like that? Do-yoon claims he just wanted to protect the guild's reputation, but Sangho sees through him. It's not about the guild, is it? It's about his pride. Their tense standoff is broken when one of the guild members reminds Sangho to dismiss the clerics who helped secure the area. Sangho composes himself and addresses the hunters, thanking them for their efforts, especially Jin-hyuk, who played a key role in keeping everyone alive. As a gesture of gratitude, Sangho invites Jin-hyuk to join the Titan Guild directly, skipping the usual registration process. Do-yoon can't hold back, immediately stepping in to belittle Jin-hyuk as just a D rank who got lucky. Sangho snaps back loudly. He reminds the shitface that this mere D rank saved countless lives that would have been lost without his determination. Sangho then forces Do-yoon to apologize, delivering a heavy blow to his pride. However, Jin-hyuk declines the offer. He's not interested in joining a guild where people like Do-yoon hold authority. That's the final straw for Do-yoon, who lunges at Jin-hyuk with an enhanced punch, only to be met by Jin-hyuk's bat squarely in the stomach. The blow knocks him out cold, and the scene soon makes headlines, sparking quite a buzz in the local news. The next day, the higher-ups of the Titan Guild are seething over what happened to Do-yoon. Not only was he publicly embarrassed by a mere C rank, but he was also demoted from his position as Deputy Guildmaster. They demand that this C rank show up before them to explain himself. However, Sangho, the Guildmaster, isn't having any of it. He points out that Do-yoon not only put multiple guild members at risk for the sake of his pride, but also attempted to attack someone who fought for their guild. That's more than enough reason for a demotion in Sangho's eyes. This comment shuts the gathered crowd down, leaving them with nothing to say. Sangho sends them on their way, but his thoughts wander back to the extraordinary C rank he witnessed the other day. Before he grows any stronger, he must get Kang Jin-hyuk to join his guild, no matter what. Jin-hyuk was chilling in his apartment, sprawled on the couch with a drink in hand, lazily checking his spending habits. Since his last hunting spree brought in a ton of cash, he'd gone overboard with expenses, and now things were looking wild. If he'd known it'd turn out like this, he probably would have taken that extra pay the Titan Guild offered him. Still, he didn't really care. He had better ways to make money anyway. After some much-needed downtime, he hopped back into the dungeon, ready to stack more monster corpses for cash. But hunting the same old weak monsters wasn't cutting it anymore. Now that he'd powered up, he craved tougher fights. So, he pushed deeper into the second floor, only to stumble into a small army of orcs waiting for him. One tried to sneak from behind, but Jinhyuk smoothly dodged and countered, dropping the orc in a single hit. As more swarmed in, he couldn't help but think that a few days ago, this would have been game over for him. Thanks to his new gear though, he handled them like it was nothing, and soon 20 orc corpses were lying at his feet, enough loot to keep him set for a year. Still feeling fired up, he ventured deeper, stepping into the third floor, known as the Temple Guardian's Labyrinth. It looked empty at first, but the calm shattered when the ground began shaking violently. A giant stone hand erupted from below, and Jinhyuk barely dodged in time. The hand belonged to a stone golem made of pure mana, fast, heavy, and way too strong. Even blocking its hits sent him staggering backward. Realizing it was dumb but powerful, he aimed for its head and shattered it clean, only to watch it start reforming. That's when it hit him. Golems only die when their core is destroyed. Before he could regroup, the monster's arm regenerated and grabbed him mid-escape. Just when he thought he was done for, an arrow zipped through the air and nailed the golem right in the chest. Seizing the moment, Jinhyuk dashed in, jabbed through its back, cracked the core, and ended the fight for good. Turning around to thank his savior, he expected that dwarf from before, but instead, standing there was a stunning elf woman with long pointed ears and a look that could kill. Before he could even speak, she stormed over, grabbed his collar, and started grilling him about who he was and where he came from. She clearly wasn't from his world. His outfit alone had her confused. After bombarding him with questions, she finally eased up when he mentioned he'd just entered the dungeon today. Her eyes widened as she shoved him down, shouting that he knew the way out. Dropping her bow, she looked half crazy, half relieved, claiming she'd finally found a way to escape. Jinhyuk, still dazed, tried to ask what the hell was going on, but she ignored him completely and demanded that he guide her out. He rolled his eyes, thinking she was way too pushy, but damn, she was pretty, so he let it slide. She promised him a huge reward for helping her, bragging that she was a platinum-ranked mercenary and totally trustworthy. Introducing herself as Lucia, a half-elf with a reputation, she was shocked when Jinhyuk admitted he'd never heard of her. When she flashed her badge, he still looked clueless, making her ask if he was from some countryside dump. "I'm from Seoul, Korea," he replied flatly, and her face went blank. She realized right then that a crazy mage might have actually succeeded with a dimensional hop spell. According to her, a mage from her world cast some experiment that ended up pulling this entire dungeon into his dimension. It sounded insane to Jinhyuk, but it lined up with everything that felt off. If the dungeon returned to its original world, it could screw him over completely. When he asked if she planned to send it back, she said it wasn't possible to reverse the magic here. It was way too complex. But there might be a hidden room on this floor that could help, one she'd found long ago while searching for an exit. She asked for his help getting there, promising a solid reward in return. Since the deal didn't sound half bad, Jinhyuk decided to tag along because honestly, this weird-ass adventure had just started getting interesting. As they kept moving through the dungeon, cutting down a few stray orcs along the way, Jinhyuk couldn't help but realize that Lucia was way stronger than he first assumed. That arrow she'd fired earlier wasn't just some lucky shot, it packed serious power, and honestly, fighting her here would have been suicide. His best play was to stay chill, cooperate with her, and keep observing how she handled things. After trekking for a while, they decided to take a breather at a safe spot. Jinhyuk had stashed a few emergency chocolates in his pocket, so he handed one to her, thinking it'd be a nice gesture. Turns out she loved it a little too much before he knew it. She devoured his entire stash like a sugar-crazed maniac, and was still asking for more. Unfortunately, that was all he had left, but she looked satisfied enough to keep going, so he figured they were good for now. Eventually, they reached a massive chamber that housed the dungeon's boss, and Lucia was convinced the mage's spell they were looking for might be hidden in there somewhere. The only problem, it was guarded by the boss itself. She told him not to stress too much, just to back her up once she took the big guy down so they could access the sealed room. The moment they stepped inside, the monster roared loud enough to shake the walls and charged straight at them. Lucia didn't even flinch. She pulled back her bow, energy crackling around her as she shouted for him to watch closely. Channeling something called aura, she fired an arrow that smashed straight into the boss's chest, sending it crashing onto its back like a ragdoll. One hit from her was enough to drop that massive armored beast. Yeah, she was definitely showing off. Now it was Jinhyuk's turn to finish the job before the thing recovered. Remembering how golems work, he knew the core was the weak point, so he leapt onto the monster's chest and swung his bat right where he thought it'd be. The first hit didn't do much, and before he could go again, a huge fist came flying from the side. He barely blocked it, activating his cleric skill Holy Shield just in time, and using the recoil to spring himself right back onto the creature's chest. If one hit wasn't enough, then fine, he'd just keep smashing until it stopped moving. After a few solid blows, the bat finally broke through, cracking the core wide open and ending the fight for good. His level shot up again, almost reaching 200, and he could feel the raw power rushing through him. When it was all over, he turned to Lucia and asked her to teach him how to use aura like she did. But the funny thing was, he had already used it without realizing. His shield skill had transformed his holy cleric power into aura on its own. Lucia had no clue what kind of skill that was, but seeing his potential, she figured he could probably learn to control aura way faster than she expected. Maybe even start enhancing his attacks right away. Still, before she'd agree to teach him properly, she gave him one simple condition: go back and bring her more chocolates. Meanwhile, back in the city, Sang-ho walked alongside his secretary, Lee Hyena, discussing a new anomaly that had appeared near Gangnam Station. It was detected yesterday, which meant they had about 5 days to prepare before a powerful monster crashed the party. No matter how Sang-ho pictured it, there was no way his guild was going to handle this one alone. However, all the other major guilds had been dispatched overseas, leaving the Titan Guild as the only one left in Korea to fight. Hyena continued searching for capable hunters who were freelancing locally, but none of them seemed reliable. Sang-ho, however, already had his sights set on someone else, and coincidentally, that someone just happened to be crossing the street. He excused himself from the conversation with his secretary and ran after Jin-hyuk, who was carrying home a large box of snacks the elf had asked him to get. When the guildmaster called out to him, Jin-hyuk turned, listening as Sang-ho made another proposal for him to join the Titan Guild. But Jin-hyuk had no plans to change his mind. Seeing that, Sang-ho offered him a compromise, a job as a mercenary, so he could still work for the guild without being a part of it. The rewards sounded substantial, which caught Jin-hyuk's attention, but he only promised to think about it. He later returned to the dungeon and presented the snacks to the elf, who happily devoured them all. It was clear that her world didn't have this kind of food. After her hearty meal, Jin-hyuk asked why she was eating down in the basement when they'd already defeated the boss monster. She pointed up at a magic circle on the ceiling and explained that it connected the dungeon to the world he lived in. Because of this, she would be staying there for the time being, to study it, and if he wanted to learn more about aura, he'd better bring her more chocolates. Once she finished eating, she took his hand to teach him how to use aura. The first step was for her to pour her own aura into his body so he could feel what it was like. As Jin-hyuk felt the power flowing through him, Lucia noticed a sudden spike of energy. It seemed he had more talent for this than she initially expected. The movement of holy power coursing through him was impressive enough that she believed he'd grasp the basics by the end of the day. She commended him for his natural talent and asked if he could remember the flow of aura in his body. He confidently assured her he could, and she acknowledged it with a nod before turning to leave the dungeon. She mentioned that she was supposed to investigate the magic circle first, but decided it would be faster to train him on how to use aura, and the best way to do that was through practical experience. She then took him to a different part of the dungeon and tossed him straight into a horde of monsters. He managed to hold his own while collecting their corpses. Turning to Lucia, he questioned why he was fighting an army of monsters when she had said he'd be learning how to use aura. Lucia's expression made it clear she believed this was the best way to learn. Even though she had infused a bit of mana into his body so he could feel it, she told him the rest he'd have to sense on his own by activating aura through his holy power. There was no better way to build instinct than in the middle of real combat. As they battled, the ground started to shake, and a stone golem emerged from the earth. The creature let out a deafening roar and pushed Jin-hyuk back, as Lucia explained that he needed to face a true crisis to unlock his potential. She told him to focus and try to feel the holy power coming from the shield he generated with his skill. Since the shield itself was made of aura, mastering it would come faster that way. Easier said than done, especially since he didn't even consciously activate the holy shield. He wondered how he was supposed to feel aura from something that turned on automatically. The monster suddenly brought down its massive fist toward him, and he barely managed to block it with the holy shield again. But this time, he felt a strange energy gathering around his left hand, the one that had activated the skill. This must be what holy power felt like. The golem attacked again, and Jin-hyuk summoned his holy shield once more, but this time, it looked different, and the sensation of summoning it wasn't the same. He suspected this must be mana. However, before he could think further, the golem smashed down on the shield, sending him flying back. From her platform, Lucia mocked him, saying she told him to get the hang of his skill, not to make foolish mistakes. Jin-hyuk gritted his teeth, realizing he was doing exactly what she'd told him to do. As he steadied himself for another attack, a status window suddenly appeared before him. He had acquired a new skill, Holy Power Application. It allowed him to use holy power to enhance both attack and defense, depending on how much power was used. That revelation made him pause. There were actually ways to gain skills beyond just a job change. Lucia noticed him spacing out and decided to step in, saying that facing a golem while learning aura might be too much for him. She was ready to handle it herself, but Jin-hyuk quickly recovered, telling her to stand down. Now that he had a grasp on his new power, he was confident he could handle it. He charged at the golem, leaping into the air to narrowly dodge another stone fist aimed right at him. While mid-air, he focused his mana on the bat, used a front flip to gain more momentum, and brought the mana-enhanced bat crashing down onto the golem's head. The monster fell, but he wasn't done yet. Landing on its chest, he concentrated again, channeling even more mana into his bat before slamming it down on the creature's core. In that moment, he unlocked a new skill, Holy Aura. With his enhanced weapon, he stabbed the golem and shattered its core, unlocking not only his holy aura, but also gaining new skills like precision strike and unyielding. Thanks to Lucia's brutal training, he had unlocked 2 passive skills and an active one. Lucia, however, was more stunned by how quickly he learned to use aura in battle. She had only intended to teach him the basics and be done with it, but now she knew she had to see this through to the end. She drew one of her arrows and brought down a wall, opening the area to an even larger horde of monsters. Jinhyuk was far from impressed, but he readied his bat anyway and prepared for another fight, bracing himself as he muttered inwardly that, here they go again. The battle with the monsters in the dungeon drained Jinhyuk completely, and by the time he went to sell the monster corpses, he looked like he had just crawled out of a war zone. When he arrived at the black market, the boss, Jin Chol, immediately noticed his exhausted state. Choosing not to ask too many questions, Jin Chol got straight to business, accepting the corpses and bringing up the topic of the alcohol Jinhyuk had sold last time. Marketed as traditional artisan soju, the drink had exploded in popularity, with orders flooding in ever since it hit the market. The thought made Jinhyuk pause. If he focused solely on selling liquor, he could probably live comfortably without ever worrying about money again. With that comforting realization, enough savings to last a lifetime, and a small business already set up, Jinhyuk headed home to rest. His training with Lucia had left him completely worn out, and the moment his head hit the pillow, he passed out instantly. Not long after, he was jolted awake by the blaring sound of a disaster alert. A loud automated voice echoed through the streets, urging everyone to evacuate and get to safety. It was the day of the monster invasion, though it had arrived earlier than expected this month. Normally, these invasions happened at random, but there was one that occurred regularly every month. This particular invasion wasn't unusual, and under normal circumstances, Jinhyuk would have used it as a chance to hunt low-level monsters for some quick cash. This time, though, he was too damn tired to care. The large guilds would handle it anyway, or so he thought. That was until a new notification popped up on his phone, announcing that, due to the urgency of the situation, the rewards for defeating monsters were now tripled. At that point, there was no way Jinhyuk could ignore it. He grabbed his gear and stepped out into the street to see what he could take down for some quick profit. Around him, security officials were shouting orders and trying to clear civilians from the area, while the Titan Guild fought hordes of monsters charging through the city. The security line was breaking fast, and Sangho was running out of stamina trying to hold the line. No matter how many monsters he cut down, more just kept pouring in. The guild members were already at their limits. Even though it looked like they were holding the upper hand, things weren't looking good. From a safe distance, the guild's secretary watched the chaos unfold with worry. Everything seemed fine thanks to the guildmaster's leadership, but she could tell they were being stretched thin. If only they had one more strong hunter to turn the tide. Her thoughts drifted to a man Sangho had recently shown interest in, someone he believed had potential. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone and called Jinhyuk. At that moment, Jinhyuk was busy fighting goblins when he answered. The secretary quickly offered him a chance to join the Titan Guild for the battle, promising generous compensation in return. Jinhyuk wasn't easily swayed and demanded 5 times the usual pay. She told him to meet her at a predetermined location to discuss further. When they met, she offered him 4 times the normal rate instead. He wasn't thrilled, but eventually agreed. She handed him a device that would track how many monsters he killed, explaining that it would record his contribution to the guild. If his performance exceeded the average, he'd get the full reward he asked for. With a real opportunity to show off his strength and get paid fairly, Jinhyuk took off toward the battlefield. The secretary watched him go, unsure if he'd live up to the expectations Sangho had placed on him. After all, the only time he had taken down Du Yun was by pure luck. No one really knew how capable he truly was. As soon as he arrived, Jinhyuk spotted a rampaging ogre and charged at it without hesitation. In a single, powerful strike, he brought it down, leaving everyone around him stunned. The crowd started whispering, assuming he must be at least an A-rank hunter. Jinhyuk smirked to himself. Maybe A-rank was close, but with his current abilities, he figured he was already stronger than that. He drank a mana potion to recharge and steadied himself. Thanks to Lucia's brutal training, he had reached level 200. Normally, there was no way someone like him could handle an ogre, but as long as his mana didn't run out, he was confident he could go toe-to-toe with S-rank hunters. With over 1,500 mana potions in stock, every monster in the area basically looked like free money to him. Elsewhere, Du Yun was fighting alongside his guild members when he noticed the monsters around them thinning out fast. Curious, he turned to see what was happening and spotted a small crowd watching someone tear through the beasts like it was nothing. When he saw who it was, his expression twisted. It was Jinhyuk. Anger flared instantly. He barked at his guildmates to stop gawking and get back to fighting, but his focus was locked on Jinhyuk. Why the hell was this guy here? And who invited him? The memory of their last encounter, the one that got broadcast all over the news, still burned in his mind. That humiliation was something he hadn't forgotten. Last time must have been pure luck, he thought, but this time, he'd make sure to crush him properly. Determined to put Jin-hyuk back in his place, Do-yoon charged straight toward him, but Jin-hyuk saw him coming a mile away. With precise timing, Jin-hyuk countered, sending Do-yoon flying and knocking him out cold before he even got the chance to strike. Sorry, not today, Jin-hyuk muttered under his breath, brushing off the dust and the commotion. Meanwhile, across the battlefield, Sang-ho was struggling against a rampaging minotaur. His mana was nearly depleted, and he was running out of stamina fast. The beast raised its massive club for a killing blow, and for a split second, Sang-ho considered retreating just to catch his breath, but before the hit could land, a powerful force struck from behind. Jin-hyuk came soaring down from above, grabbing the minotaur by its horn and slamming it hard into the ground. For a C-rank hunter to take down a monster like that in a single hit was absurd. Sang-ho couldn't help but grin. His judgment about Jin-hyuk had been right all along. As the monster fell, Sang-ho approached to thank him, but Jin-hyuk brushed it off, saying that Hyena had called him and promised a hefty reward for his help. So, there was no need for gratitude. Sang-ho chuckled and decided to take the opportunity to make another offer, telling him that if he joined their guild, opportunities like this would keep coming. Jin-hyuk took a moment to consider it, then simply replied that once they finished cleaning up the remaining monsters, he'd think about it. As they talk, Sang-ho receives a call from Hyena. She tells him to look at the sky, where the clouds have turned black and the weather has become fiery, crackling with lightning. Something huge and menacing lurks among the clouds, and it does not appear friendly. The creature shoots lightning down at everything, targeting both monsters and hunters while damaging buildings as it flies overhead. It's so high in the sky that their skills can't reach it, leaving them with no way to attack. Sang-ho suggests returning to his guild to assess the situation and invites Jin-hyuk to join him. Reluctantly, Jin-hyuk agrees, and they reconvene in his office. They run various tests, only to find that nothing they've done so far can affect the creature or defend against its attacks. Every attempt to stop it has been nullified or destroyed. They realize they need something with immense firepower capable of long-range destruction. Lucia immediately comes to Jin-hyuk's mind, and he recognizes that there may be a way to bring it down after all. As Jin-hyuk leaves to fetch Lucia, the executives of the Titan Guild gather to discuss Sang-ho's apparent favoritism towards a C-ranker. The other guild members brainstorm alternative methods to defeat the monster without relying on Jin-hyuk, but they find themselves with no other choice. All other strategies are guaranteed to fail, leaving them with only the option to trust the one hunter with a plan. They consider calling the Gudiyar Guild, a large group filled with A-rank and higher mages. But no, they don't care about casualties. Inviting them would likely lead to many deaths. The room falls silent as they acknowledge their limited options. Meanwhile, Jin-hyuk emerges from the portal with Lucia, thanking her for agreeing to help and promising her as many sweet treats as she desires in return. They ascend to the top of the Titan Guild headquarters, where Jin-hyuk shows her the monster terrorizing their city. He asks if she can take it down, and she confidently assures him that she can. The monster is so large that she could hit it with her eyes closed. It's a level 300 creature, the highest ever recorded, and she says she can eliminate it. But first, she needs some assistance. The building's roof can't withstand her power, so she asks Jin-hyuk to prepare a shield to absorb most of the impact. Not wanting to see multiple buildings destroyed, Jin-hyuk calls the guild leader to inform him about the potential damage once they take down the monster. Sang-ho tells him not to worry about collateral damage and to focus solely on bringing the creature down. With that settled, Jin-hyuk prepares the shield, while Lucia charges 2 arrows to strike the beast. She aims carefully and releases the arrows, creating a massive shockwave that pushes Jin-hyuk back even with the shield. The 2 shots soar through the sky and land a direct hit on the monster, obliterating half its body from the impact. The Titan Guild watches in awe from the ground, amazed that Jin-hyuk managed to pull it off so effortlessly. Meanwhile, Jin-hyuk is impressed the whiplash from Lucia's attack leaves smoking trails on the building's helipad. While it wasn't the time to hold back, this was excessive. Lucia, on the other hand, is disappointed that the monster was so weak, attributing her ease in defeating it to her immense strength. Regardless, the job is done, and it's time for her to head back. She hands Jin-hyuk a tracker that monitors his points, showing a staggering 240 points. Before leaving, she warns him not to place too much trust in others, especially when money is at stake, because people's minds tend to cloud with greed. She advises him to be wary, as she has learned from her many adventures. Jin-hyuk assures her he'll be fine and will handle anything that seems off. They part ways, and he heads down to the street, where he's met by Sang-ho and his secretary. They catch up with him and ask how he managed to take down such a formidable monster alone. Jin-hyuk politely declines to share, calling it a secret. One of the executives is offended and doesn't believe a mere C-ranker could defeat such a giant beast. However, Jin-hyuk shows them the monster tracker, displaying a substantial number of points, proving he indeed took it down. Sang-ho stops the executive there and apologizes to Jin-hyuk for the outburst. The executive watches in anger, feeling Sangho favors a C ranker over his guild members. He decides it's time for a change, as Sangho is hindering the guild's future. He pulls out his phone and dials an unknown number. By the next day, rumors spread throughout the city that an ordinary C ranker had defeated the giant monster. Members of the Titan Guild were skeptical, but verifying the information wasn't too difficult. Word also circulated that the guild master had personally offered Jinhyuk direct entry into the Titan Guild, which he turned down. He must have been confident in his skills to reject such a significant offer from Sangho himself. The rumors even reached the Ultron Guild, who learned that Do-yoon had been hospitalized after the monster invasion. Known for his impressive skills, it was revealed that he had been defeated by the rumored C-rank hunter. If this was true, then the rumors held some weight. The Ultron Guild scouts decided to meet with Genik to verify the information. They suspected he might have unlocked a hidden class, which was exceptionally rare for hunters. If that was the case, they needed to recruit him into their guild before another one took him, or eliminate him. Meanwhile, Jinhyuk slept soundly after the battle. Having exhausted all his stamina, he passed out as soon as he got the chance, and woke up 2 days later, realizing the toll of overexertion. He walked into his living room and found that Lucia had created a massive mess with all the snacks he had bought her. She had managed to eat everything in just 2 days. With no food left in the fridge, her only option had been to consume the snacks. Since he hadn't opened the portal for her, she couldn't return to the dungeon. This confused Jinhyuk, as he had never needed to open the portal before. It had always been accessible. He headed to the attic to show her that the portal was indeed open, but it didn't make sense to her since there had been nothing there moments ago. She instructed him to step away from the door, then reopened it, revealing that there was nothing there now that he had stepped back. Jinhyuk was baffled since he had only ever seen the dungeon open. Lucia theorized that the dungeon responded only to him, suggesting it was imprinted directly on him, meaning it could have fallen on his head. Luckily, it was a failed spell. He decided not to dwell on it, and instead ordered food for both of them. Lucia then wondered how he had found his way back to the house after they defeated the monster. She explained that she had placed a recognition suppression spell on it, which should have made it impossible to locate. Jinhyuk asked why she would cast such a spell on his house. Lucia revealed that strange individuals from a guild named Ultron had been visiting while he slept, which annoyed her enough to ensure they could never return. Jinhyuk was perplexed as to why those large guilds would be searching for him. He pulled out his phone to discover what had happened during his slumber. The first headline he saw grabbed his attention. News of him defeating the giant monster had gone viral. A video was circulating that clearly showed him fighting alongside the Titan Guild, and it seemed he had become famous overnight. This newfound attention was problematic. His greed in using Lucia's power had placed him under a spotlight. The hunter industry was territorial, and strong competitors were swiftly eliminated. He resolved not to dwell on the past. With Lucia done eating, they returned to the dungeon to deliver their loot to the dwarf. Thanks to Lucia's powerful shot, the monster's body was too damaged to salvage, leaving them only with its head. The old man was frustrated with Lucia for overdoing it and ruining valuable material, revealing a natural animosity between them. Jinhyuk interrupted their argument and asked the dwarf if he could craft something from the corpse. The dwarf dug out an organ from the head, which allowed it to produce lightning. With that, Jinhyuk could enchant his baseball bat to create lightning as well. He inquired how the dwarf would like to be compensated, but the dwarf simply wanted Lucia to leave his workshop. Angered, Lucia began shaking with rage, and Jinhyuk had to calm her down by promising more sweets. After barely preventing her from shooting a hole through the dwarf's head, he headed back into the city to buy her the promised treats. On his way back home, Jinhyuk sensed something lurking in an alleyway. It seemed like someone was tracking him. With a quick flick, he dropped his groceries behind a wall and called out to whoever was following him. The hidden presence was startled that Jinhyuk had noticed him at all. Suddenly, a figure appeared out of nowhere and rushed at him, swinging a sword. Jinhyuk barely managed to block the attack with his bat. The newcomer was astonished that Jinhyuk could even see him, which confirmed the rumors that Jinhyuk was more than just an ordinary C-ranker. Determined to prove his strength, Jinhyuk pushed the attacker back and leapt at him for a counterattack. Since the attacker clearly wanted to keep his identity a secret, Jinhyuk decided he would just have to beat some sense out of him until he talked. However, the attacker had a different plan. He used a skill to turn himself invisible. Jinhyuk could just faintly feel his presence enough to dodge and block most of the attacks, but he knew he couldn't keep that up forever. If only he had his usual bat, but the old dwarf was still working on it. Stuck with a regular aluminum bat, he thought it was going to be a long day. Realizing he needed to make a run for it, he tried to escape. Just as he moved, the hooded attacker attached a tracking device to his shirt. Jinhyuk sprinted toward a crowded area, hoping to hide, but the device allowed the attacker to track his every move. The trail led to a bathroom in a department store. He muttered to himself that it was the perfect place to hide. Camouflaging himself, he kicked open a stall door, ready to pounce, except there was nothing there but the tracker stuck to the wall. He realized it was a bathroom trap, and at that exact moment, the assassin realized he'd been played. Frustrated, the assassin charged up a fireball, aiming straight at Jin Hyuk and a poor kid who just wanted to use the toilet. With no time to spare, Jin Hyuk threw up a shield to protect them both. The assassin used the smoke as cover to escape. Jin Hyuk sighed, annoyed that there had been a fireball and a runaway. Just as he tried to catch his breath, an object suddenly pierced through the assassin's chest, killing him instantly. Shocked, Jin Hyuk blinked in surprise, realizing he hadn't meant to kill him. As he lamented the situation, a status window popped up in front of him. It acknowledged the kill, but labeled it as self-defense, which came as a relief, though he still could have done without the drama. Before he could process it further, 2 detectives approached him, asking questions about the incident. He cooperated, explaining that he had just been minding his own business when chaos erupted. Luckily, since he hadn't received the villain trait, the detectives didn't suspect him of foul play. They confirmed he was acting in self-defense and let him go, though not before warning him not to mention the words murder, self-defense, or villain. They handed him a device that would monitor his every word. Jin Hyuk muttered under his breath about having a babysitter as they let him go. As he headed home, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he had become the center of attention in the hunter community. Meanwhile, the detectives speculated among themselves, noting how he had managed to block a powerful attack while protecting a child, and had even taken down a high-level hunter. They whispered that there was no way this guy was just a C rank, and hoped he wouldn't do anything to lose their trust. Back at home, Jin Hyuk checked out his new class, the Inquisitor. It seemed to build off his cleric abilities, but with a twist. His skills were now more self-focused, allowing him to act like a tank while healing himself. On top of that, he gained the ability to see the karma of others. He found it ironic that he could now literally judge people, and shook his head with a smirk. Excited to test out his new powers, he returned to the dwarf's workshop. As promised, his weapon had been enchanted to send out lightning attacks. All he had to do was think about it, and it would release up to 3 charged lightning blasts. He chuckled, already envisioning the chaos he could unleash. However, Lucia wasn't as impressed. She looked concerned, saying she couldn't sense any holy power from him anymore, and asked what he had done in the human world. Jin Hyuk simply shrugged, explaining that he couldn't share much because of the monitoring device. The dwarf, who overheard, offered to dispose of the device if Jin Hyuk completed a simple task to retrieve an item from a dangerous location using a compass he provided. Jin Hyuk grinned, thinking it sounded like a fun day. This little errand dragged him to a treacherous mountainous path that seemed to defy all logic. Steep cliffs, impossible terrain, and death traps everywhere. Who in their right mind would come here willingly? And yet here he was, armed with nothing but basic hiking gear, rappelling down what looked like a bottomless pit. All this effort just to mine some ores. That old dwarf really had no shame, sending him into a death trap over shiny rocks. Meanwhile, Lucia was having the time of her life. While Jin Hyuk wrestled with his gear and tried not to fall to his doom, she leaned back casually, watching his struggle like it was prime entertainment. Amused by his efforts, she teased him, wondering if he was really struggling this much just to go down. From her perspective, this was nothing, and she made sure he knew it. If he wanted to make it out in one piece, he had one job: follow her lead, stick to her instructions, and under no circumstances act on his own, unless he wanted to experience a tragic yet slightly comedic death. Then, as if to prove how easy it really was, she took a step forward and jumped. No ropes, no hesitation, just a confident leap into the abyss. Jin Hyuk barely had time to react before she was already scaling down the rock face with nothing but her hands, landing effortlessly like she'd done this 100 times before. Of course, she had. A total show-off. Jin Hyuk sighed, knowing full well he couldn't just do what she did, at least not without breaking a few bones in the process. Taking a deep breath, he loosened his grip on the rope and muttered to himself before letting go. The moment he free fell, adrenaline flooded his system. The wind roared past his ears, and for a second, doubt crept in. But as he neared the bottom, instinct took over. Using his hands and legs, he braced against the rocky walls, slowing himself down just enough to land beside Lucia, completely unscathed. She barely looked impressed. Arms crossed, she raised a brow and remarked that it had taken him long enough. Taking a break in the middle of their mission, they settled on a steep cliff, gazing at the endless landscape below. The conversation naturally drifted toward what had happened outside. Removing the device might get Jin Hyuk in trouble, but the old dwarf had been oddly confident about it, saying it would be fine. That meant there had to be a way. For all his grumpy outbursts, that blacksmith was undeniably talented. Shifting the conversation, Lucia's curiosity turned to something else: karma values, specifically the ones tied to Jin Hyuk's new class. She asked about her own level, and after a quick check, he informed her that she had 82, the highest among the 3 of them. Jin Hyuk himself sat at 64, while the old dwarf had 72. The numbers didn't surprise her. Considering the life she had led, it made sense that she had the highest karma. She had done everything she could just to survive. Even so, the difference between her and Jin Hyuk was only 20 points, and he had only killed 1 person so far. Lucia, on the other hand, had long since lost count. That thought led her to an interesting comparison. In the world she used to live in, there had been saints, beings who could distinguish good from evil with just a glance. Jin-hyuk immediately dismissed the idea that he was anything close to a saint, and Lucia agreed without hesitation. That wasn't her point though. She was merely saying that the ability to gauge evil existed across different worlds, not that she cared much about it right now. Truthfully, she had little interest in wasting time searching for a mind just to satisfy the old fart. What interested her, however, were Jin-hyuk's new abilities. She was eager to analyze them thoroughly. When he asked why she was so invested, she simply shrugged and said that she found him entertaining, and she wasn't wrong. Watching him figure things out was much more interesting than staying holed up in an abandoned dungeon. They needed a better way to understand karma values, and Lucia had a simple solution: go outside and run some real experiments. Jin-hyuk hesitated. He felt bad about pausing their mission for the old man, but Lucia had a point. Staying in the dungeon with just the two of them wouldn't give him any deeper understanding of his abilities. After a brief moment of contemplation, he reached into his pocket. Even if he felt a little guilty about ditching the dwarf's request, his curiosity won out. Fishing out a return stone, he held it between his fingers. This particular stone had been set to instantly transport him to a predetermined location outside. With a firm squeeze, he crushed it. A dimensional rift split open right where they stood. Lucia barely had a second to react before she was swallowed up by the portal, her momentary surprise vanishing into the void. Strangely enough, using the stone caused Jin-hyuk's karma to rise. A few minutes later, the duo found themselves standing in the middle of a bustling city street. Crowds moved in waves, neon signs flickered to life, and the air buzzed with energy. Lucia, unfazed by the chaos, casually sipped her drink, while Jin-hyuk sat across from her, quietly panicking over how her so-called camouflage magic was completely failing its job. She had assured him earlier that she was using magic to disguise her true appearance and blend into the crowd. Technically, she wasn't lying. Her pointed ears and otherworldly features were hidden, but the illusion of human clothing didn't change the fact that she looked way too perfect. Every passerby stole glances at the stunning woman sitting across from Jin-hyuk, some even outright staring. Lucia, of course, had no complaints. With a sly smirk, she pointed out that her beauty simply couldn't be concealed. Even with magic, camouflage had its limits, after all. Jin-hyuk wanted to disagree. Really, he did, but even he had to admit that she was probably the most breathtaking woman he had ever seen. And the worst part, she knew it. Deciding to move on before she got even more smug, Lucia steered the conversation towards something more important: their investigation into karma values. So far, their findings were straightforward. Doing bad things increased karma, and it didn't always take something extreme. Jin-hyuk himself had gained a single karma point just for breaking his promise to the old dwarf. Apparently, it wasn't just about hurting people. Betrayal, deception, and even irresponsibility could contribute. On the other hand, harm that was consensual, like a fight in self-defense, wouldn't raise karma at all. The exact scale of karma still wasn't clear, but one rule stood out: once a person's karma exceeded 200 points, they were officially labeled as a villain. At that point, killing them wouldn't even count as murder. It would be classified as self-defense. Essentially, the system stopped seeing them as human. Considering that even Lucia and the old dwarf hadn't reached 100 points, getting past 200 wasn't just a bad habit, it took dedicated villainy. Jin-hyuk had been quietly scanning people throughout the day, checking for any ridiculously high karma values. So far, the most he had seen from a regular pedestrian was somewhere around 50. If they wanted real data, they were wasting their time in a peaceful public area. They needed to go somewhere darker. Thankfully, the city had just the place: the red light district. As night fell, the streets lit up with a kaleidoscope of neon signs, flashy billboards, pulsing music, and the smell of cheap alcohol. This was where the city's real underbelly thrived. As they walked through the streets, a shady-looking barman approached with an exaggerated grin, his eyes lingering a little too long on Lucia. He showered her with compliments, calling her the most stunning lady to grace these parts, and mentioned an ongoing event at his bar: beautiful women could enjoy up to 5 cocktails completely free. Lucia barely acknowledged him. Without breaking her stride, she shoved him aside and continued walking. Before she could get far, Jin-hyuk placed a firm hand on her shoulder, stopping her. He suggested they take a moment to enjoy those free drinks, insisting it would be a waste to turn down such a generous offer. The barman, practically glowing with excitement, eagerly led them inside, promising that Lucia would receive the best service the establishment had to offer. After walking all day and encountering only ordinary people with unimpressive karma values, Jin-hyuk finally found what he was looking for: the barman, an irredeemable villain with a whopping 300 negative karma floating above his head. Settling at the bar, the duo received their drinks and took a sip. The cocktail had a sweet, smooth flavor, something Lucia immediately approved of. Meanwhile, the barman stood a few steps away, quietly snickering to himself. Those two had no idea what they had just consumed. A single drop of the poison-laced liquor was enough to paralyze an average person. There was no escaping it. The moment he saw them relaxing, he signaled a group of thugs waiting in the shadows. They stepped forward, their focus locked on Jin-hyuk. The plan was simple: take him out first. Jin-hyuk, however, barely acknowledged their presence. He simply took another sip and asked if they were sure this was the route they wanted to take. The thugs hesitated for a split second, confused by his calm demeanor. That was when the realization hit: the poison wasn't working. Thanks to his status effect resistance, the so-called fast-acting toxin was nothing more than overpriced juice. Without warning, Jin-hyuk spun around and delivered a bone-crushing uppercut to the nearest thug, sending him staggering backward. Finally, some action. It had been a while since he could properly stretch his limbs, and these street rats looked like the perfect warm-up. With a smirk, he pulled back and threw another devastating punch, knocking 2 goons out at once. 2-for-1 deal. Not bad. The remaining thugs barely had time to react before he pivoted sharply, shifting his weight for a brutal kick. His foot connected with another thug's face, and with just a single strike, the man collapsed unconscious before he even hit the floor. Meanwhile, Lucia's eyes fluttered open as the effects of the paralytic poison finally wore off. Groggy but alert, she turned her head to assess the situation, only to find a pile of bodies scattered across the bar floor. Confused, she glanced at Jin-hyuk. He simply shrugged, saying he was just cleaning up some trash. The barman, now visibly sweating, decided it was time to bring out his trump card. With a desperate yell, he signaled for his strongest fighter to step in, a towering man with a buzz cut. The brute cracked his knuckles as he removed his jacket, muscles bulging through his shirt. This wasn't just some random thug, he was a hunter. The moment he charged forward with impressive speed, both Jin-hyuk and Lucia watched him with complete indifference. Jin-hyuk kept his gaze locked on the approaching brute, analyzing his movements. Meanwhile, Lucia, unfazed, casually reached for another shot of the poisoned cocktail and asked if he needed any help. Jin-hyuk waved her off. One more thug wasn't enough to make him break a sweat. Buzzcut, however, was less than amused. The duo was talking about him as if he were some kind of background character. Enraged, he swung his heaviest punch straight at Jin-hyuk's face, only for his fist to be stopped mid-air by a perfectly timed grab. No matter how much he strained, pushed, or twisted, he couldn't move Jin-hyuk an inch. A terrifying realization dawned on him. This wasn't just some random troublemaker. The sheer strength behind that grip meant only one thing: Jin-hyuk had to be a hunter. But that didn't make sense. If he was strong enough to be a hunter, why was he wasting his time in a dingy bar fighting low-level criminals? While Buzzcut desperately tried to figure a way out of the situation, Jin-hyuk casually tightened his grip ever so slightly until a sickening crack echoed through the bar. A scream of pure agony ripped from Buzzcut's throat as multiple bones in his hand shattered all at once. But Jin-hyuk wasn't done yet. To shut him up, he followed up with a devastating punch straight to the man's mouth. Buzzcut flew backward like a ragdoll, crashing into a line of bar stools. His momentum finally stopped as he slumped against the debris. With every last goon taken care of, only one piece of scum remained: the terrified barman. Jin-hyuk moved like a wild beast, closing the distance in a flash before locking the man into a chokehold. The villain's windpipe nearly collapsed under the relentless pressure as he clawed at Jin-hyuk's arm, struggling for air. But mercy wasn't on the table. Lifting the barman off the ground, he cut off his oxygen completely. The interrogation had begun, and of course, what kind of interrogation would it be without a few warm-up hits? Jin-hyuk didn't hold back. Fists rained down without hesitation, painting the bar walls with the barman's blood. By the time he was done, his own knuckles were dripping red, and the man's face was swollen beyond recognition. Only when he was satisfied did he finally get to the real questions. It was obvious this wasn't the barman's first time pulling something like this. To run an operation like this under the radar, he had to have someone backing him up. Yet even with his face barely intact, he continued to deny any involvement with a bigger power. There was no way a worthless thug like him could repeatedly spike drinks and abduct women without getting caught. And those hired gangsters, they weren't just street-level punks. Someone had to be pulling the strings. Jin-hyuk narrowed his eyes, giving the barman one last chance to talk. The villain still stubbornly shook his head. Either he was ridiculously loyal, or whoever was behind this was far more terrifying than the beating he was taking now. There was only one way to find out. Without warning, Jin-hyuk grabbed one of the barman's feet and started pulling. The villain thrashed, panic setting in as he screamed and struggled. Jin-hyuk, unfazed, calmly explained that he was simply helping him find the motivation to talk. The barman tried to act tough, forcing out a weak declaration that violence wouldn't make him talk. Jin-hyuk strongly disagreed, but before he could escalate things further, Lucia stepped in with a look of pure exasperation. She told him to step aside and quit the barbaric, overcomplicated methods. Jin-hyuk huffed but let her take over. Lucia calmly raised her hand, manifesting a mysterious power that shimmered ominously in her palm. She brought it close to the barman's face, and in an instant, his expression shifted. The sheer terror drained away, replaced by a strange sense of ease, though he remained just as hideous. A few moments of silence passed as the power seeped into his system, and then out of nowhere, his face twisted into something deranged. His eyes darted wildly as he suddenly blurted out a question, asking if they were sent by an organization called Ultron. His voice cracked with paranoia, insisting that no matter how much trouble Ultron stirred up, it was already too late. Lucia tilted her head. That wasn't the reaction she expected. Sure, She meant to loosen his tongue, but she hadn't planned on making him a complete lunatic. Well, at least it worked. The barman kept rambling, his words spiraling further into madness. He sneered, as he declared that Ultron was insignificant, his tyrant guild would wipe out every last one of their enemies. And just like that, the truth revealed itself. The Tyrant Guild. Jin-hyuk's eyes darkened. This situation was bigger than he initially thought. Now that the guild's name was on the table, he pressed forward, demanding to know what made them so confident they could massacre their enemies. The barman, practically drooling at this point, let out a crazy chuckle. His answer was simple: they had Al-Rauni's elixir. Jin-hyuk frowned. That name meant nothing to him. What the hell was he talking about? A few minutes later, the police arrived to investigate the incident, but by then, Jin-hyuk and Lucia had already slipped away. What started as a simple bar brawl had unexpectedly led them to uncover a massive conspiracy, one that reached all the way to the top, with a major guild secretly pulling the strings. As they hurried through the dimly lit streets, Lucia explained the horrifying truth. Al-Rauni's elixir wasn't just some ordinary performance enhancer. It was a drug that doubled the user's stats, but at a horrific cost. To make it, countless young women were sacrificed. She had heard of dark practices before, but never in her wildest nightmares did she think a guild from Earth would be capable of producing something so sinister. It was almost unfathomable, but this wasn't new to her. Back in her world, Al-Rauni's elixir had existed too. There, they called it the Queen's Tear, a name that carried a heavy, painful weight. One of her closest friends had been sacrificed for it when they were younger. Years later, after reaching platinum rank, Lucia had personally wiped out the organization responsible for the drug's production. No mercy. No negotiations. She had burned them to the ground. That explained why she had been so grim ever since they left the bar. The moment she heard the name Al-Rauni's elixir, she already knew what had to be done. Now, the question was, what next? The barman had already spilled that the elixir was almost complete. If they wanted to stop it, they needed to take down the Tyrant Guild before production was finalized. Meanwhile, back at the bar, long after the police had left the scene, a man dressed in all black stood in the shadows, reporting the incident to his superiors. His mask and glasses covered most of his face, but his sharp, calculating tone left no doubt about his efficiency. Based on his investigation, this wasn't an internal dispute. What was strange was that the perpetrators had only killed the barman and left. This wasn't a tactic used by any rival guilds or their usual enemies. Something didn't add up. His orders were clear: find out who had interrupted their operation. And soon, the masked man was confident whoever the perpetrators were, they wouldn't stay hidden for long. But the Tyrant Guild wasn't the only one making moves. At the Titan Guild, the atmosphere was tense. Their top brass was currently overseas on business, but that didn't stop the gears from turning. The ever-efficient secretary, Lee Hyena, had just finished overseeing their operations in Hong Kong. The results had been excellent. If they kept this up, they could even consider recruiting 15% more guild members. By all accounts, the guild was thriving. But Seo Sangho, the Titan Guild's leader, wasn't feeling too great. He had just received news about Al-Rauni's elixir. As expected, even someone as competent as Lee Hyena had never heard of it before. The association had been working hard to keep its existence under wraps. Unfortunately, Hyena's return to Korea would have to wait. There was still guild business overseas. That meant Sangho would have to handle things on his own. Wasting no time, he issued an urgent order to the entire guild, effective immediately. Titan Guild was declaring full-scale war against the Tyrant Guild. The sudden declaration sent shockwaves through Hyena. A move like this wasn't just risky, it was an outright gamble. Lee Hyena, ever the voice of reason, immediately asked for more details, saying that declaring war without consulting their executives or having a strategy was reckless even by Sangho's standards. But he wasn't budging. He knew that failing to act now would only lead to greater chaos later. If the information he had received was correct, by the time the world found out about Al-Rauni's elixir, it would already be too late. Hyena, still skeptical, pressed for more information. What exactly had he learned that made him take such a drastic step? Declaring war on a guild as powerful as Tyrant wasn't something they could undo. Sangho didn't answer right away. He knew the risks. He knew this decision would shake the entire guild, but he also knew they wouldn't be alone in this fight. Ultron Guild, and even the government itself, would be on their side once the truth came to light. Even so, war carried enormous risks. Hyena suggested they at least consult their executives first, make a plan, act cautiously. But Sangho had already made up his mind. His thoughts had never been clearer, and he had no patience for drawn-out meetings or debates. One look at his expression told Hyena everything she needed to know. He wasn't going to change his mind. Sangho was a cautious man by nature, but this time, he was decisive. He understood Hyena's reservations. Acting blindly was never ideal, but right now, there was no time to hesitate. For now, he needed her to trust his call. They would keep the war declaration confidential within the guild while conducting hushed investigations. The official announcement of war could come later. As for the internal investigations, Sangho already had a few people in mind, certain individuals he needed more information on. What had prompted this sudden shift in his stance? What had pushed him to act so suddenly? A single text from Jin-hyuk, a warning about Tyrant's plan to create a sinister drug, one fueled by human sacrifice. Meanwhile, Lucia was comfortably lounging at Jin-hyuk's place, happily munching on sweets while pestering him about his plans. Honestly, she was just relieved to know that there were still some sane and reliable people in this world like So Sango. If no one had stepped up to take down the Tyrant Guild, she would have handled it herself. And really, with how insanely inhumane the method for creating Alrauna's elixir was, it needed to be stopped. Jin-hyuk, on the other hand, had a slightly different concern. He glanced at the elf, who had been practically living in his pantry, and asked when she planned on going back to the dungeon. Her response, a hard no. Why would she return to some dull dungeon when she could join a raid against a villainous guild instead? She figured that if the Tyrant Guild was crazy enough to concoct something so sinister, then they definitely weren't your average hunters. Even Jin-hyuk had to admit this wasn't something he could take on alone, at least not yet. That's when Lucia officially threw in her support. She was all in on wiping out those scumbags together. Jin-hyuk appreciated the gesture, even though she didn't have the help. Then knock knock. Someone was at the door calling out his name. Jin-hyuk wasn't expecting anyone, so this was an unplanned surprise. A delivery maybe, or something else. Beside the door, it was the masked man, the one investigating what went down at the bar. That man had a magical compass, one that could track people through blood. Using the barman's blood, he had locked onto the traces left on Jin-hyuk from the bar fight. And this guy, he didn't need a car. He navigated the city effortlessly, leaping across rooftops like it was a casual stroll. His hunt led him straight to an apartment complex where he finally came to a stop. Staring at the humble home in front of him, the masked man felt something odd. For a split second, the house almost seemed hazy, but he shook off the thought, probably just his imagination. More importantly, he recognized the address. This was the home of the hunter who took down the Leviathan a few days ago. That meant there could be a connection between the two incidents. Not that it mattered to him. His job was simple. Find a target, get answers. Without hesitation, he conjured a thick needle out of thin air, its sinister aura practically pulsing in the air. He was ready to persuade his target into answering a few questions. Meanwhile, Jin-hyuk casually walked to the door and asked who it was. As expected, the masked man responded with a classic excuse. He was here for a late delivery due to an accident. Jin-hyuk wasn't foolish. A delivery showing up in the dead of night, not a chance. On top of that, his house was shielded by a recognition suppression spell, making it practically impossible to locate. If someone had managed to bypass such a powerful enchantment and still had the nerve to show up pretending to be a deliverman, there was only one reason. They were up to something shady. Still, he opened the door, remaining on high alert. The moment he did, the masked man wasted no time, forcing his way inside with a sinister-looking needle in hand. As expected, the intruder had no intention of playing fair. But Jin-hyuk had already anticipated underhanded tactics, so when the needle came for him, he effortlessly caught the attacker's wrist. With a hint of amusement, he couldn't help but wonder if deliveries now came with poison darts as a complimentary bonus. The masked man, who had planned a perfect sneak attack, found himself on the receiving end of the surprise instead. Before he could regain control, Lucia intervened, firing an arrow while urging Jin-hyuk to step aside. The shot was devastating. At such close range, dodging was impossible. The arrow struck with immense force, sending the intruder hurtling through the second-floor window. As he crashed outside, blood poured from the deep wound, the arrow burying itself further into his body. But Lucia wasn't taking any chances. Without hesitation, she prepared another shot, signaling to Jin-hyuk that she intended to finish the job. The boy, however, dismissed the idea, insisting that he would handle it himself. He reasoned that the masked man had likely come for him due to the incident at the bar. Lucia, unconvinced, pointed out that this opponent was no ordinary assassin. After all, he had survived a direct hit from one of her arrows. Meanwhile, the villain struggled to remove the embedded arrow, his hands trembling from the blood loss. As he finally pulled it free, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of dread. The sheer force behind that single attack had left him in critical condition. He shuddered, realizing that the woman inside wasn't someone to be taken lightly. Despite his injuries, his survival instincts screamed at him to escape while he still could. By the time Jin-hyuk moved to pursue, the man was already making a clumsy but determined getaway, leaping across neighboring rooftops despite his wounded state. Lucia glanced at the boy, silently asking if he wanted to give chase, but he found the idea far too troublesome. The masked man would come for him again eventually. There was no need to rush for now. Something else caught his attention. The man's karma value was over 900, the kind of number that only belonged to seasoned killers, those who took lives as if it meant nothing, a real villain. Jin-hyuk couldn't deny it. This was going to be interesting. The next day arrived, and our boy and Lucia found themselves seated inside a guild car, being escorted to the mountains. Their driver eventually pulled over, gesturing toward a remote investigation site ahead. This wasn't just any random mission. They had been brought here under Titan Guild leaders' personal orders. But of course, that didn't change the fact that plenty of people within the Titan Guild weren't exactly thrilled about Jin-hyuk's presence. As they stepped out, he scanned the gathered troops at the base of the site, His quick assessment told him that at least half of them were A-rank hunters, or higher, a team of pure elites, and leading them, none other than that guy, the same irritating bastard who had once tried to pick a fight with him. Executive Han Young-suk, looking all-important, had apparently been put in charge of the operation. From the moment our boy saw him, an undeniable sense of irritation bubbled up. This mission was definitely going to be a headache. The executive wasted no time formally introducing himself, and much to Jin-hyuk's surprise, he even brought up their last encounter during the airstrike. What was even more unexpected was the shift in his attitude. Today, he appeared oddly amicable, almost polite. Jin-hyuk couldn't help but notice the drastic difference in personality, and found it very suspicious. Sure enough, Young-suk cleared his throat awkwardly and followed up with an apology, claiming he had just been overly enthusiastic in his efforts for the guild last time. He hoped they could put the past behind them so it wouldn't affect today's mission. Jin-hyuk wasn't exactly convinced, but he let it slide for now. Moments later, the executive turned his attention to Lucia. Clearly taken aback by her presence, he inquired about who she was, clearly expecting some kind of explanation. Jin-hyuk casually introduced her as a skilled colleague who wouldn't be a hindrance. The recon team they had sent ahead returned with their report. With a curt nod, Young-suk excused himself to hear what his scouts had to say. Of course, Jin-hyuk wasn't fooled by the executive's little display. Apology or not, the guy was still looking down on him and Lucia, probably assuming they were just a couple of C-rank nobodies. It didn't matter how strong they actually were. This four-eyed bastard had his own agenda, and his condescending attitude hadn't changed one bit. Lucia had already picked up on the executive's fake politeness. She quietly checked with Jin-hyuk, wondering if they were really going to let this guy take the lead. Jin-hyuk assured her that it wasn't worth worrying about. They'd be fine. Besides, there was something more interesting to deal with. Someone had been tailing them since earlier. It wasn't even subtle. Both Jin-hyuk and Lucia had noticed their not-so-covert pursuer a long time ago. But instead of confronting them, Jin-hyuk had decided to let it be. There was no rush. Whoever it was, they might be useful later. Before the raid began, Jin-hyuk handed Lucia a bright magical crystal, a small but invaluable communication item. With this, they could stay in contact within a 10 kilometers range. They would need it later, so it was best to keep it close. Meanwhile, Young-suk returned with a confirmation of the initial reports. The evidence was undeniable. The Tyrant Guild was heavily involved in human trafficking, but rather than just sharing intel, Young-suk had another request. After investigating the area, the recon team discovered a strong magical barrier surrounding the building. The problem is that only one person could break through it without setting off every alarm in the vicinity, and according to Young-suk, that person was none other than Jin-hyuk. The young man immediately called him out. This wasn't a request, it was a suicide mission, walking straight into enemy territory alone. That was as good as signing a death warrant. But Young-suk, ever the impartial team leader, kept a straight face. He even had the audacity to throw in some sarcasm, claiming that only the man who took down the Leviathan could possibly pull off such a stealth mission. And to make it sound even more reasonable, he pointed out that Jin-hyuk would probably have an easier time going in alone, rather than working with Titan Guild members he had never teamed up with before. Of course, that was just another way of saying, "We're dumping all the risks on you. Good luck." It was obvious that they thought they were outsmarting him, neatly shifting the burden onto his shoulders. But what they didn't realize was that this was exactly the kind of situation Jin-hyuk had been hoping for. With that, he joined a select team of Titan Guild hunters and moved toward the part of the barrier where they could create an entry point. The plan was straightforward. The magic team would generate a small breach, just big enough for Jin-hyuk to slip through. The problem, these so-called experts could only hold the breach open for a few seconds, which meant he had to move at full speed. They reached the eastern side of the facility and wasted no time. The magic team got to work, struggling to maintain even the slightest gap in the barrier. Jin-hyuk didn't hesitate. He knew he was being played, deliberately funneled into enemy territory like a disposable pawn. But strangely enough, he didn't mind. After all, his real interest wasn't in the mission itself. He just wanted to see exactly what the Tyrant Guild was hiding in these mountains. The moment the breach was established, our protagonist wasted no time and dashed inside the barrier, his eyes gleaming with excitement as he scanned the compound. But the moment he stopped and summoned his trusty bat, he noticed something strange. The base looked completely different from the outside. The protective barrier must have been layered with a distortion effect, disguising its true appearance. That wasn't his concern for now. First things first, he needed to locate the entrance to this massive base camp. However, after several minutes of wandering, something felt off. There were way fewer guards than he had anticipated. The place was supposed to be a high-security facility. It felt eerily underprotected. Eventually, he spotted a lone guard stationed near the barrier, seemingly guarding an entrance. That was the first real lead he had. After all, if someone was standing guard, there had to be something worth protecting behind them. Wasting no time, our boy leaped into the air and raised his bat, pouring his monstrous strength into the swing. The plan was simple: knock the guy out, capture him, and get some much-needed answers. But just as his bat made contact, something unexpected happened. Instead of a satisfying impact, the guard simply vanished, dissolving into thin air like smoke. It was an illusion. Jin-hyuk stood there for a moment, blinking at the empty space where the guard had been. Well, that was disappointing. So much for interrogating someone. Now, it was entirely up to him to figure out how to get inside. Much to his surprise, the supposedly high-security facility had automatic doors like a freaking supermarket. The lack of proper defenses was almost laughable. No biometric scanners, no heavy-duty locks, not even a single CCTV camera in sight. It was as if the people running this place were so confident that the women they abducted had zero chance of escaping that they didn't bother with real security. Still, Jin-hyuk wasn't about to let his guard down. Just to be safe, he pulled out an insurance policy. From his inventory, he retrieved an EMP generator, a handy little device crafted from the materials of electric-type monsters, and casually dropped it onto the floor. With this, any communications or security systems in the area would be fried. This was precisely why he had left a magic communication crystal with Lucia beforehand, so they wouldn't lose contact despite the blackout. As the EMP took effect and the compound was officially cut off from the grid, Jin-hyuk took a deep breath. Now it was time to get started on the real mission. From a distance, the masked man remained fixated on Jin-hyuk, silently observing his every move. The pieces were starting to come together. Jin-hyuk's connection to the bar incident and the Titan Guild was becoming clearer. But just like everyone else, the masked man had his own hidden motives. And for some reason, Jin-hyuk was a key factor in ensuring everything played out smoothly. Meanwhile, inside the facility, the consequences of Jin-hyuk's actions were already rippling through. The EMP he had set off didn't just disrupt security. It also ruined someone's gaming session. One of the idle guards had been engrossed in his phone, only to watch in frustration as his screen went black. Cursing the countryside's terrible signal, he grumbled about how his precious gaming time always seemed to get interrupted. Unfortunately for him, that would be the least of his worries. Before the realization even sank in, something red came hurtling toward him. A bat. Jin-hyuk didn't even bother swinging it. He had thrown it instead. The blunt tip slammed mercilessly into the side of the man's face, and before he could react, the bat had already pierced through. The guard crumpled to the ground, out cold. Without missing a beat, Jin-hyuk activated auto-recovery, summoning his weapon back into his grip. Finally, an opponent made of flesh and blood. The impact sent blood splattering against the nearby wall, as the body hit the smooth concrete floor with a dull thud. And yet, this wasn't some trained hunter or elite fighter. He was just an ordinary man. An ordinary man with a karma value of 800. That number spoke volumes. If even a regular person here had committed enough atrocities to rack up such a score, then this place wasn't just corrupt, it was overflowing with inhuman scum. That meant our boy could go all out. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Every single person involved in this twisted operation deserved nothing less than absolute annihilation. Pushing forward, he entered the locked gate and found himself in a long, dimly lit hallway lined with prison doors. The atmosphere was suffocating, thick with the stench of neglect. This had to be where they kept the abducted women. A quick glance into the cells confirmed his suspicions. The conditions were beyond inhumane. Each prisoner was shackled like a caged animal, stripped of dignity, awaiting their fate. They weren't just captives, they were resources for that cursed elixir. But before Jin-hyuk could process his next move, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Someone was calling out, demanding to know who he was. Unlike the other cells, one held a man. Jin-hyuk's eyes narrowed as recognition set in. The prisoner wasn't just anyone. He was wearing the uniform of the Tyrant Guild. Despite his own predicament, the captive wasted no time warning Jin-hyuk to get out while he still could. Whatever was happening inside this facility, it had already driven everyone to the brink of insanity. Staying any longer was a death sentence. Meanwhile, outside, the so-called team leader was busy checking his watch, tracking the progress of Jin-hyuk's infiltration. It had been a while since the young man entered, and things were still eerily quiet. Maybe it was time to make a move. Young-suk didn't hesitate. With a single order, his men were set into motion, advancing toward the facility in a synchronized rush. Dressed in black jackets, the Titans swarmed forward like a mass of eager flies, ready to strike at the first sign of trouble. Meanwhile, Lucia stood at the side, utterly unfazed by the rush of activity. Young-suk threw her a glance, still unable to figure out what her deal was. Unlike the rest of them, she didn't seem the least bit concerned. Finally, as the four-eyed bastard joined his men outside, Lucia mulled over her own role in all this. Before the mission had begun, Jin-hyuk had been clear. He would handle everything inside the building alone. That was his fight. Her job was different. She was here to keep an eye on the Titans. They still had no idea what Han Young-suk might try to pull, and that meant she had to stay vigilant. The boy had warned her against getting too involved, but playing it safe had never been her style, and she wasn't about to start. Now, back inside the facility, the prisoner finally introduced himself as Jung Da-hoon. Jin-hyuk, sizing him up, wasted no time in questioning how a Tyrant Guild member had ended up in such a pitiful state. Da-hoon didn't hesitate to admit the truth. He had been locked up for attempting to kill all himself. Right now, the only reason they were keeping him alive was for his expertise in illusion magic. That distortion effect on the protective barrier. The fake guard. Yeah, all his work. Jin-hyuk found himself intrigued. Why would someone betray their own guild and sabotage its research? The answer was simple. Dihun just couldn't stomach the cruelty anymore. Watching his colleagues throw women to monsters as bait had pushed him to his limit. Eventually he snapped, tried to take Al-Rauni down once and for all, and got caught. For once, Jin-hyuk was pleasantly surprised. A tyrant guild member with a conscience. That was a rare sight. Even the man's karma value was surprisingly low, just 62. Without hesitation, Jin-hyuk extended an offer. If Dae-yu wanted to tear down this wretched facility, they might as well work together. Meanwhile, in the control room, the grunt assigned to monitor security was having a peaceful little nap in his chair. It wasn't the first time, and it probably wouldn't be the last. He always got sleepy at this hour, and really wasn't a big deal. Nothing ever happened here, at least that's what he thought. The moment he woke up, something was off. Instead of the usual live feeds of the entire facility, the screens in front of him were pitch black. He blinked, looked around in confusion, and tried to make sense of the situation. Panic set in as he scrambled to reboot the system, only to realize the real problem. The power source had been fried. Thanks to Jin-hyuk's EMP, every electronic device, including smartphones, was out of commission. The entire system was dead, and he had slept through the whole disaster. If there was an award for Employee of the Month, he was definitely not getting it. Just outside the command center, a few tyrant guild members were passing the time with a card game, having the time of their lives. That was, until their relaxed evening was rudely interrupted by the control room guy screaming about an emergency. Annoyed, the players turned to him, more irritated about their game being cut short than anything else. But the moment they heard what had actually happened, their frustration turned into alarm. The entire security system was down. Every single woman locked in the cells was missing. And worst of all, they had an intruder. With no time to waste, the team leaders quickly split their forces. One group headed straight for the Al-Rauna production room, while the other focused on tracking down the intruder and the missing captives. And as for the genius who had let this all happen, the control room grunt was now stuck with one job: find a way to contact headquarters, no matter what. Every single prison cell had been unlocked, freeing the abducted women. With their lives hanging by a thread, they wasted no time, rushing toward the nearest exit. Leading the way was Dae-yoon, who knew the facility's layout like the back of his hand. He navigated the group through the most optimal path, getting them dangerously close to freedom, only for trouble to arrive right on cue. The tyrant boys had caught on to their escape. As soon as they spotted the fleeing women, they flooded into the area like a pack of rabid dogs. The first one to step in immediately recognized Dae-yoon, charging in alone with the bold claim that he would finish Dae-yoon once and for all. But the moment his punch landed, reality shifted. A cruel reminder of Dae-yoon's specialty, illusion. The attacker seethed with rage, realizing he had fallen for such a simple trick. Meanwhile, while Team 2 was struggling to chase down Dae-yoon and the women, Team 1 was having a far worse time elsewhere. Armed with little more than knives, they found themselves face to face with someone much more dangerous: Jin-hyuk, and they had brought knives to a baseball bat fight. Jin-hyuk made quick work of them. His superior technique and footwork turned their pathetic attempts at combat into an absolute joke. With each swing, he sent a tyrant boy crumpling to the ground. One clean hit her target, as if you were just knocking down bowling pins. By the time the last one hit the floor, Jin-hyuk hadn't even broken a sweat. Judging by how desperately they had been guarding the front gate, there was only one conclusion: Al-Rauni had to be inside. Without wasting another second, Jin-hyuk gained access to the room and cautiously stepped in. The sight that greeted him was even more vile than he had imagined. The tyrant scum hadn't just been making the inhumane drug. They built an entire underground lab to mass produce it. Human-sized test tubes filled the space, each one containing a woman the guild had abducted for their twisted experiments. The sheer scale of their operation was enough to make his stomach turn. But the worst part of all, at the center of the lab, encased in protective glass, was the source of this nightmare. The monster responsible for all this grief and suffering, Al-Rauna, Jin-hyuk, tightened his grip on his bath. The creature showed no reaction to his presence, completely still. It was entirely possible that it was asleep. That was fine. It just made things easier. With a smirk tugging at his lips, he called forth the lightning dwelling inside his weapon, electricity crackling through the air. Stepping into his batting stance, he prepared to take the ultimate swing. If everything went according to plan, he would end this tonight. Suddenly, without warning, tentacles burst from the tubes, lashing out at the boy with terrifying speed. Glass shattered all around, as a monstrous creature emerged from the wreckage, roaring in fury. Jin-hyuk reacted instantly, activating his hardened skin ability and dodging as the tentacles struck violently. Wasting no time, he pushed forward, closing the gap between them. But before he could land a hit, one of the writhing limbs managed to catch him, sending him flying across the room. Groaning, he forced himself upright, using his bat to steady himself. His mind raced. What was that power? Even with his armor and hardened skin, the attack had nearly pierced through. Shaking off the pain, he readied himself for another round. Charging in once more, he used his bat to deflect the flailing tentacles, maneuvering swiftly around the battlefield. With a sharp pivot, he ran up the wall, using the momentum to launch himself through the air. His strike was precise. the bat stabbing straight into Al Rowan's chest. Suddenly, electricity crackled around him as he channeled his skill, sending a surge of lightning through the monster's body. Al Rowan convulsed violently, its entire form twisting in agony before collapsing to the ground in a smoldering heap. Breathing heavily, Jin-hyuk scanned the aftermath. Amidst the wreckage, something caught his eye, an object lying near the monster's corpse. He approached cautiously, attempting to appraise it, but the result came up blank. Based on its shape and energy, he could only assume it was a magic stone. Without hesitation, he stashed it away and pulled out his communication device. Contacting Lucia, he asked if the girls had moved safely. She confirmed that they were fine, but quickly added something concerning. One of the Tyrant Guild members was with them. Jin-hyuk explained that the man had betrayed his own guild and had been helping them. He believed the guy was sincere. Lucia then inquired about Alrauna, to which Jin-hyuk casually assured her that had been taken care of. Plus, he'd even scored a magic stone in the process. Just as he was about to leave, Lucia updated him on the battlefield. The others were still fighting against Titan Guild members, but something was wrong. Suddenly, the enemies had grown significantly stronger, fighting like they had gone completely berserk. Jin-hyuk's expression darkened. If the Titan Guild lost here, it would cause even bigger problems. He instructed Lucia to help them out. She acknowledged the request, her bow already charging with energy before ending the call, with a teasing remark about how he owed her a ridiculous amount of sweets for this. Jin-hyuk chuckled lightly, stepping over the remains of the battle. But just as he moved forward, his expression sharpened. He wasn't alone. Without turning, he called out to the unseen presence, his voice calm but firm. He knew someone was there. A man emerged from the shadows, looking genuinely surprised that he had been sensed. Jin-hyuk narrowed his eyes. There was no need for small talk. What was the real objective here? Was it the Alraun stone? Or was it him? The man smirked, admitting that he had originally come for the stone. But after seeing Jin-hyuk in action, he had changed his mind. Jin-hyuk's gaze darkened. That was a mistake. Without warning, he charged forward, bat raised for another fight. The assassin lunged, aiming a deadly stab with his knife, but Jin-hyuk slipped past the attack with ease. Countering instantly, he struck with his hand, only for the assassin to block, clearly taken aback by Jin-hyuk's speed. For a brief moment, the assassin reeled. Too fast. Far too fast for a C-rank hunter. That's when it clicked. This wasn't the first time Jin-hyuk had reacted unnaturally fast. Even back at the home, catching that poison dart wasn't just luck. Jean-hyuk suddenly hurled his bat, but the assassin sidestepped, watching as it embedded itself deep into the wall. Before he could react further, Jin-hyuk leaped into the air, calling his bat back to his hand like a magnetized weapon. The assassin barely had time to register what was happening before the bat came swinging toward him. Dodging at the last second, the assassin managed to land a counterattack, striking Jin-hyuk's back, but the hit was completely nullified by his armor. Frustrated, the assassin adjusted his strategy, aiming directly for the boy's neck, but Jin-hyuk deflected him with a forceful shove. Without wasting a second, Jin-hyuk charged his bat with raw electricity, forming a concentrated lightning ball before hurling it straight at the assassin. The man barely managed to conjure a defensive shield, struggling to withstand the sheer force of the attack. Smoke filled the air as the battlefield crackled with energy. Through the lingering smoke, Jin-hyuk surged forward, his grip tightening around the bat. With deadly precision, he struck the assassin, the weapon crackling with lightning as the force of the impact coursed through his enemy's body. One final blow ended the fight. The assassin collapsed lifeless. Outside, chaos reigned. The Titan Guild members worked swiftly, burning the bodies of the fallen Tyrant Guild hunters to erase all traces of the battle. Amidst it all, Young-suk, now tending to his wounds, reflected on how close they had come to death. If that elf hadn't stepped in, they would have been wiped out. Her arrows, sharp, swift, and relentless, had matched the caliber of an S-rank hunter, a terrifying thought in itself. As the cleanup continued, a hunter approached with an update. All the wounded had been transported to the hospital, and every piece of evidence had been erased. Young-suk gave a nod. With the Tyrant Guild taken care of, it was time to move forward with a welcoming ceremony. But just then, an unexpected arrival disrupted the moment. Dae-yoon, the Tyrant Guild member who had betrayed them, rushed in, his expression tense. There was no need for words. His face alone carried bad news, and sure enough, his warning was dire. The Tyrant Guild leader, along with their main forces, was already on the way. A chilling realization settled in as Young-suk stiffened. The guild leader Jo Won-chul was coming. A brief moment of silence followed before the weight of those words sank in. There was no chance of winning against someone like him. Before they could fully process the first report, another followed, confirming that the Tyrant Guild hunters were approaching fast. Time was running out. Quickly assessing the situation, Young-suk made the only logical decision: abort the operation. A retreat was their best option now. Turning to Dae-yoon, he asked if the man would be coming with them, but hesitation flickered in his eyes before he shook his head. Leaving now would make his defection far too obvious. He would stay behind and submit a false report instead. Young-suk studied him for a moment before offering a nod of understanding. That was fine, but one thing was certain: an all-out war between the guilds had to be avoided for now. Before departing, he issued one final order: pin everything on Hunter Kang Jin-hyuk. The informant remained silent, weighing the implications of that command. Meanwhile, the Titan Guild made their retreat. As they ran, one of the hunters voiced his skepticism, questioning whether Young-suk's trust in Daeun was warranted. But Young-suk barely spared him a glance. It didn't matter. They just needed time, because sooner or later, full-scale war was inevitable. Daeun stood in place, his posture calm yet alert. Moments later, Lucia approached, her gaze sharp as she questioned whether he was the person Jinhyuk had mentioned. Without wasting time, she told him to, "Let's go." Jinhyuk was waiting inside. The elf, ever composed, asked if the situation had been handled. Jinhyuk simply nodded, stating that he had taken care of the man who had followed them. With that out of the way, Daeun turned to Jinhyuk, seeking an update on their current predicament. Jinhyuk wasted no time in explaining. Alraune was dead, but there was still a loose end to deal with. He suggested pinning everything on the attacker, making it look like he had died in battle against Alraune. The elf hesitated for a moment, questioning if Jinhyuk truly intended to frame the man for everything. Our boy, unbothered, told him to check the diary. Inside were the names of all the victims of recent serial murders. Their attacker wasn't just some random thug, he was the great guild killer, the one who had been shaking the entire public by targeting major guilds. If they made him the scapegoat, no one would suspect a thing. Without hesitation, Jinhyuk turned to Daeun, asking if he could handle it. Daeun, still processing the plan, admitted that he didn't fully understand Jinhyuk's methods. But if he was saying there wouldn't be problems later, then that was enough. He assured them that he would take care of the rest, and urged them to leave. After all, the Tyrant Guild was already on its way. They had roughly 2 hours before their arrival. Fortunately, the advanced party had been nothing more than an illusion he had created. Before parting ways, the Daeun expressed his gratitude, thanking Jinhyuk for saving him and the others. Jinhyuk, as usual, dismissed it casually. There was no need for thanks, just a simple request to contact him once everything was over. As he walked away, our boy couldn't help but smirk at the thought of what was about to unfold. The Tyrant Guild had suffered a massive blow, and once the other guilds caught wind of it, they wouldn't just sit back and watch. The guild's downfall was inevitable, and honestly, he was looking forward to seeing it crumble. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Titan Guild's master, Seo Sangho, and his secretary, deep in discussion over the latest developments. The situation had escalated beyond expectations, and it was no longer just a problem for the Titan Guild. It affected the entire guild system. Sangho decided that the best course of action was to share the information anonymously. His secretary, however, pointed out that doing so would benefit other guilds, potentially putting Titan at a disadvantage. But the guildmaster wasn't concerned about that. If word got out that Titan Guild was directly involved, the resulting guild war would be catastrophic. It was better to resolve the situation quietly than to waste time scheming for personal gain. With that, the secretary followed orders and anonymously leaked the information. Not long after, the news exploded with reports about the Tyrant Guild's criminal activities. People everywhere were talking about it, and arrests within the guild were already being made. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the Tyrant Guild refused to submit to the investigation. One person who wasn't taking it well was Young-seok. Enraged, he cursed his guildmaster, blaming him for ruining everything. He wasted no time dialing his superior, demanding to know why they had given away the information anonymously. After all, they had done all the work. Yet now, those Ultron bastards were being hailed as heroes. The guildmaster remained unfazed, explaining that if they had exposed themselves, the Tyrant Guild would have crushed them before the other guilds had time to react. But Young-suk wasn't satisfied. He argued that if his plan to recruit an S-rank hunter succeeded, the Tyrant Guild wouldn't stand chance. The guildmaster, however, wasn't convinced. He questioned whether Young-suk could truly guarantee victory against the Tyrant Guild's master, and more importantly, what would happen to the civilians caught in the crossfire. Young-suk dismissed the concern, calling it a minor loss compared to the power they would gain by absorbing the Tyrant Guild's strength. That was the last straw. The guildmaster, voice filled with frustration, demanded to know what the point of being a hunter was if they couldn't even protect civilians. Young-suk's so-called loyalty to the guild was nothing more than selfish ambition, and he wasn't fooling anyone. Before Young-suk could argue further, the call was cut off. Furious, he slammed his fist into his monitor, seething with resentment. As long as his current guildmaster remained in power, the Titan Guild would never move forward. But he had no intention of sitting around and accepting that. Without hesitation, he made another call. The voice on the other end was uninterested, already knowing what this was about. Another recruitment attempt. He wasn't interested, unless of course it was for the position of guildmaster. This time, Young-suk didn't hesitate. He would make it happen. He would give him the position. And with that, the next move was set into motion. The scene shifts to our boy, who had been set up for a secret meeting. But instead of choosing a discreet, low-profile location like a normal person, he went ahead and picked the busiest damn cafe right in the middle of the market. If someone wanted him to be subtle, well, they were shit out of luck. As he stepped inside, the place was alive with chatter, the rich scent of coffee filling the air. A mix of people surrounded him, and of course, a good number of them were drop-dead gorgeous women. Before he could even fully take in the scene, a voice called out to him, "Daeun," the same old Tyrant Guild buddy he'd been dealing with. Jinhyuk acknowledged him with a nod. Without wasting time, he asked if the web of lies they'd spun had held up. At first, it seemed like it had. The plan was running smoothly, but as expected, there was a goddamn problem. The Tyrant Guild had decided to form a pursuit team. Jin-hyuk barely reacted. He didn't frown, didn't flinch. Hell, he didn't even look remotely concerned. Instead, with all the urgency of a man debating whether to add more sugar to his coffee, the guild was already hanging on by a thread. Yet somehow, they still found the resources to hunt someone down. He almost found it funny. Dae-yoon had an explanation. The guild's higher-ups weren't buying the story. To them, the body had been discovered too quickly, and the news had spread too damn fast. That could only mean one thing. There had to be another culprit. Someone else is pulling the strings. Jin-hyuk, ever the picture of indifference, simply acknowledged that no concrete evidence had surfaced. As long as his identity remained hidden, there was nothing to worry about. Even so, playing it safe was never a bad idea. If lying low for a while ensured that the Tyrant Guild crumbled on its own, then maybe it was worth considering. Dae-yoon agreed. Then, without warning, he pulled out a phone and handed it over. A simple gesture, but one that carried weight. On that device was everything Jin-hyuk needed to know about the pursuit team. Jin-hyuk took the iPhone 11 and began scrolling through the information. Dae-yoon, watching him, hesitated for a moment before asking if he was really planning to go through the intel right here, right now. Jin-hyuk, of course, didn't give a shit. Nothing in this place mattered. No one was watching them. In fact, no one was real. Because the entire cafe, the chattering crowd, the ridiculously beautiful women, none of it real. It was all an illusion. Dae-yoon's reaction was immediate. He was surprised that Jin-hyuk had seen through it from the very start. And as realization dawned, Jin-hyuk simply smirked as if the whole thing was nothing more than a mildly amusing joke. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that actually mattered was who the hell thought they could chase him down. Jin-hyuk settled into his seat, making himself comfortable as Dae-yoon laid out the details. The pursuit team consisted of 2 people, an archer and a mage, both masters of disguise and concealment magic. These bastards could very well approach him in the form of someone he knew. Jin-hyuk barely reacted. His face screamed boredom. That was it. That was all they had on him. Dae-yoon, noticing the lack of interest, reached into his pocket. He actually pulled out something, a monster counter. Jin-hyuk's eyes narrowed slightly. He recognized the device, the very same type Titan Guild had given him, the one he had used when taking down Leviathan, but this one was smaller. He picked it up, examining the new design, and shot a questioning glance at Dae-yoon. After the Alrauna incident, the association had developed an advanced version of the device. Its purpose is to monitor hunters. And then Dae-yoon dropped the real kicker. Starting immediately, all hunters, beginning with his guild, were now required to wear this. This wasn't just some tracking tool anymore. It was a goddamn leash. Every hunter would now be under the association's watchful eye. That meant one thing for Jin-hyuk: trouble. With this device, even hunting in his private dungeon could become a problem. Without a hint of hesitation, he calmly handed the counter back to Dae-yoon. Dae-yoon, however, wasn't done warning him. If Jin-hyuk planned on using the Alraun pill, he needed to do it now before the monitoring system was fully established. There was no room for error. If Jin-hyuk took the pill after the system was in place, his sudden spike in power would immediately attract attention. And if that happened, even a damn Tyrant Guild would start suspecting him. Dae-yoon was practically urging him at this point. Make a decision and make it fast. Later, as Jin-hyuk wandered through the streets, his mind was buzzing with thoughts of the surveillance system. It was clear now he needed to get stronger, fast, and there was only one solution: the dungeon. Right now, as Jin-hyuk stepped into the dungeon, he was immediately met with the furious glare of the old dwarf. The moment their eyes met, the dwarf let out an exasperated curse and exploded in anger, ranting about how he had sent Jin-hyuk to fetch some ore. Yet, the damn brat had vanished without a trace, only to stroll back in after an entire week. Jin-hyuk hurried to apologize, but that only seemed to make things worse. The old dwarf had assumed he was dead in some god-forsaken corner of the dungeon, and now here he was, acting like nothing had happened. Trying to defuse the situation, the boy urged him to calm down, saying he had something important to show. The moment the dwarf's eyes landed on it, his face twisted in pure outrage. His anger boiled over as he demanded if Jin-hyuk had even a single functioning brain cell to realize what kind of shit he had just brought into the workshop. Not waiting for an answer, he spat out that the core was cursed, filled with countless grudges, and that dwarves, being highly vulnerable to curses, didn't even dare to look at such things unless they had a death wish. Before coming here, Lucia had told him she had some urgent work and practically shove him ahead. Now it all made sense. That cunning little devil had set him up. Meanwhile, the dwarf was still going off, calling the core a worthless piece of junk, and ordering him to get rid of it immediately before it did something nasty. Jin-hyuk, feeling a little guilty now, apologized again, but the old dwarf just let out a long, suffering sigh and muttered that being an idiot wasn't a crime. Shaking his head, he grumbled that he'd take care of this mess for now. That's when it clicked for Jin-hyuk. Dwarves were prideful bastards. When it came to their pride, they could pull off the impossible just to prove a point. As the old dwarf turned to leave, Jin-hyuk smirked and, in a deliberately mocking tone, muttered that if even the great boss couldn't handle it, then there was no other choice. Lucia had been damn right all along. She even said it would be too much for him. The words landed perfectly. The dwarf froze, his face twisting as if someone had just stomped on his pride. His voice came out sharp as he demanded to know exactly what that elf brat had said about him. And just like that, the scene shifted once again. Jin-hyuk found himself standing on the same cliff, staring down at the place below, the temple of a dragon. The old dwarf had taken the bait, fully accepting the challenge. He had shoved a key into Jin-hyuk's hands, instructing him to open the temple and purify the curse. Only then, he declared, would he forge something even better than that pathetic bat Jin-hyuk was using. Lucia, of course, had plenty to say about this. She gave Jin-hyuk an incredulous look and muttered that he was completely insane for using her name to provoke the dwarf. The boy just shrugged, reminding her that she was the one who abandoned him first. Without missing a beat, he held up the key and asked if his thing could really open the temple doors. For the first time, Lucia's expression turned serious. She confirmed that it could, but then asked if he had any idea what kind of place he was about to step into. Jin-hyuk, still unfazed, tilted his head and asked what she meant. Wasn't just some temple. Lucia let out a sigh, clearly frustrated by his lack of concern. It wasn't just a peaceful old ruin. It was far more dangerous than any dungeon he had faced so far. And if he went in now without preparation, he'd be dead before he could even satisfy her with his damn chocolates. She made it clear she couldn't afford to let his stupid ass get killed. With that, she turned on her heel and ordered him to move. They were going home right now, Jin-hyuk protested. After coming all this way, they was going to turn back, but Lucia wasn't budging. This dungeon was too dangerous, and they had no choice. They would return later, properly prepared. Still annoyed, Jin-hyuk muttered if they were really going to go through all this again. Lucia, already taking a leaping stance, just smirked and told him to hurry up. If he was late, she'd eat everything at his place. Left with no other option, Jin-hyuk let out a sigh and followed after her. Back at his home, Jin-hyuk lay sprawled on the floor, completely drained. As he stared at the ceiling, he couldn't help but wonder just how absurdly fast Lucia was. His thoughts drifted back to the so-called preparations she had mentioned earlier. Potions, scrolls, that was all he could think of. Maybe he should just ask her directly. But then a realization hit him. Where the hell was Lucia? His eyes widened, and in an instant, he bolted toward the kitchen. What he saw made his blood pressure spike. Lucia was there, happily stuffing her face, casually munching down on what was, oh hell no, a whole month's worth of food. The sight of her feasting away like it was an all-you-can-eat buffet made his eye twitch. Calling her shameless was the only logical reaction, but she didn't seem the least bit bothered. Before he could yell at her properly, his phone buzzed. Seeing the caller ID, his expression turned serious. It was Lee Hyena from the Titan Guild. The moment he answered, her shaky voice came through, frantic and desperate. She was pleading for his help, her words tumbling over each other as she said that if he didn't come, the guildmaster would be killed. Jin-hyuk didn't waste a second. Without hesitation, he told her he was on his way and demanded the location. As dusk settled, the dimly lit room painted a grim picture. Bloodied clothes strewn across the table, a first aid kit lying open, and Seo Sang-ho slumped his chair, his body covered in fresh bandages. His secretary, Lee Hyena, worked frantically, her hands trembling as she patched him up. Tears welled in her eyes as she begged him to hold on, sobbing that Kang Jin-hyuk was on his way. But the pain was unbearable. Sang-ho coughed violently, a fresh trickle of blood escaping his lips, making Hyena's chest tighten in helplessness. Seeing her boss in such a wretched state was more than she could bear. Sang-ho, despite his pain, forced a weak smile and assured her that he would be fine, telling her not to cry. But she wasn't stupid. She knew he was lying through his teeth. His condition was worse than he wanted to admit. Just then, the doorbell rang. Hyena flinched, her heart skipping a beat, but when she checked the security camera, relief flooded through her. It was Jin-hyuk. As soon as he stepped inside, Jin-hyuk wasted no time. He opened his inventory, retrieving a potion bottle, and moved towards Sang-ho. The injured man let out a weak chuckle, barely managing to thank him for his kindness. But Jin-hyuk simply told him to brace himself. The potion would sting like hell. Without further delay, he poured the liquid over Sang-ho's wounds. The moment it touched his skin, a sharp, burning pain tore through his body, making him writhe in agony. But soon, the worst had passed, and the healing effects began to take hold. Once Sang-ho was stable, Jin-hyuk demanded to know what the hell had happened. How could an S-ranker like him end up in such a pathetic state? Sang-ho let out a bitter laugh, his eyes filled with exhaustion and rage. It was a trap, he explained, one set by his own guild. The bastards had betrayed him. Earlier that day, he had attended a guild event, but strangely enough, only Young-suk's faction was present. That four-eyed bastard had planned it all. As they shared a drink, Sang-ho had sensed that something was off, but before he could act, it was too late. The moment the wine touched his lips, his throat burned, and he started coughing up blood. That scumbag had poisoned him. Before he could even recover, they charged at him, intent on finishing the job. Barely clinging to consciousness, he fought with everything he had, forcing his way through them and escaping by the skin of his teeth. But the damage had been done. Now he was left like this, broken and bleeding. Jin-hyuk found it strange. Even if Sang-ho had been poisoned, Ordinary guild members shouldn't have been a match for him, but before he could ask further, Songho suddenly broke into a violent coughing fit. Lee Hyena panicked as she noticed the wounds that had been sealed by the potion were reopening. Jin Hyuk immediately realized the poison must be far stronger than he initially thought. Without wasting a second, he turned to Lee Hyena and asked if she knew exactly what kind of poison had been used on Songho and whether there was an antidote. She shook her head, saying she had no idea, but hesitantly asked if they could try using the antidotes that hunters typically carried. Jin Hyuk didn't even hesitate before dismissing the idea, knowing it wouldn't work against something this potent. They needed proper treatment and fast. Without another word, he said they had to head to the hospital immediately, but Songho, still struggling to breathe, weakly refused. The hospital wasn't a safe option. They might come after him again. Jin Hyuk understood his concerns. If those bastards found out where they were, innocent civilians could get dragged into this mess too. He had no choice but to take a different route. Without wasting any more time, he turned to Lee Hyena and told her to get ready. They had to leave quickly. He had a plan. His home might have a way to treat the poison. As they got into the car and started moving, a red car almost crashed into them out of nowhere. It was Lee Hyena behind the wheel, her eyes widening in surprise as she rolled down the window to ask if they were okay. Jin Hyuk quickly assured her that he would take care of the guildmaster and told her to hurry up. Without wasting a second, she slammed her foot on the accelerator, sending the car roaring down the streets. She weaved left and right, drifting through narrow alleys like a pro. Her driving skills were no joke. As they came to a halt at a traffic signal, Jin Hyuk turned to Songho, telling him not to worry and to just stay conscious a little longer. They were almost there. But before he could say anything else, Hyena spoke up. They had a problem. Someone was tailing them. Jin Hyuk's eyes narrowed as he glanced in the rearview mirror. It was the same red car from earlier. The moment the traffic light turned green, Hyena asked what they should do. Jin Hyuk didn't hesitate. They couldn't head to his place while being followed. He had no choice. He told her to follow his directions. After a while, they finally pulled up at a construction site. Jin Hyuk told Hyena that he would block their pursuer and handed her his location, quickly informing the elf to open the door for them. As he stepped out of the car, a man in a black hoodie approached, his voice dripping with mockery. Instead of Seo Songho, a lower-ranked guy was stepping up to block him. Jin Hyuk scanned him, thinking only one person seemed to be tailing them. Just then, his phone rang. It was Lee Hyena. She hadn't left yet. Annoyed, Jin Hyuk picked up and asked why she was still there. But before he could say another word, her panicked voice cut through the line. She told him to run no matter what. The bastard standing in front of him was none other than S-Class hunter Kang Juntae. Jin Hyuk's heart nearly stopped. An S-Class? Before he could fully process it, the bastard lunged at him, wasting no time and trying to end things quickly. But Jin Hyuk's presence detection skill kicked in at the last second, and his bat moved on its own, blocking the attack just in time. The sheer force of the strike sent the bat flying some distance away, making Jin Hyuk realize just how strong his opponent was. Without wasting another second, he quickly put some distance between them and told Hyena to leave immediately. He couldn't hold this guy off for long, but he would catch up later. She hesitated for a moment, not wanting to abandon him, but in the end, she told him he'd better follow them. Jin Hyuk watched the car speed off. He let out a mocking laugh, asking where they thought they were going. Without hesitation, he summoned his spear and prepared to strike. Lee Hyena, wasting no time, stomped on the accelerator, but before the car could move forward, Juntae had already launched himself into the air. He was certain he had them until something else caught his attention. Jin Hyuk came at him with a powerful kick, but it barely missed. As expected from an S-ranker, Juntae dodged it with ease and immediately countered with his own kick. The impact sent Jin Hyuk skidding across the road, and the stubborn bastard landed on his feet just in time to watch the car disappear into the distance. Jin Hyuk could only hope the others made it out alive. Letting out a relaxed sigh, Juntae turned to Jin Hyuk, annoyed that no one had warned him about an interference. Now irritated, he told Jin Hyuk he was a bit busy and ordered him to get lost if he wanted to live. But Jin Hyuk, pushing himself back up, scoffed and told him to shut his garbage mouth. He wasn't scared of someone like him. If Juntae wanted a fight, he'd give him one. Juntae smirked, clearly amused. He admitted he was impressed by Jin Hyuk's guts, but within a second, he closed the distance, grabbed Jin Hyuk by the collar, and sneered that this was getting entertaining. Without wasting another moment, the fight erupted, both exchanging blows at a relentless pace. Jin Hyuk struggled to keep up, the sheer speed and strength of his opponent overwhelming him, but Juntae, on the other hand, looked absolutely thrilled. It had been a while since he'd found someone who could actually challenge him. With a grin, he urged Jin Hyuk to show him what he had. Then, without warning, Juntae tightened his grip, pulled back, and with both hands on his spear, prepared a lethal strike. Jin Hyuk's instinct screamed at him. If that attack landed, he was dead. Without hesitation, he opened his inventory and equipped his mithril chainmail armor, knowing it would cut both physical and magical damage in half. Just as the armor settled onto his body, Juntae's spear struck his ribs with terrifying force, sending him flying backward. The impact rattled his entire body, but as he gasped for breath, he couldn't help but be grateful he had the armor. Juntae, watching him still standing, narrowed his eyes. He had fought plenty of strong men before, but this one he didn't recognize. Curiosity sparked in his mind as he says he didn't recall anyone like him. And then it clicked. He suddenly recalled a certain class hunter, the one who had taken down the Leviathan. Yongsuk had mentioned him before, the one close to Seo Sangho. Jin-hyuk stiffened. His identity was blown. Even if he got away now, it was only a matter of time before they tracked down his house. His priority had just changed. Escaping from this guy was now the only thing that mattered. Juntae, however, had a different idea. Instead of pressing the attack, he smirked and made an offer. He told Jin-hyuk to forget about Seo Sango and join forces with him instead. The new Titan Guild needed someone like him. Jin-hyuk couldn't help but chuckle. It was almost pathetic. He had actually hesitated before the fight. But now, hearing this offer, he knew exactly where he stood. Without a second thought, he rejected it outright and told Juntae that they were going all the way to the end.